3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're going to have a tricky one today. I think it's probably important. I hope it isn't, actually, but I think it probably is. I would urge you to read Hugo Rifkind in the Times today, who draws attention to something that has been troubling me for a couple of weeks. I've alluded to it. I don't know if I've articulated it quite as explicitly as Hugo Rifkind does this morning, but where we see tragedy, some people, I fear, have seen opportunity. Some of the sort of more toxic exemplars of hard right ideology, whether in the commentariat or in the cabinet, seem to have seen an opportunity to entrench division, to turn us even more against each other than previously. And I'm not sure there has been a better example than that, than Suella Braverman describing almost entirely peaceful protests against the continuing bombardment of Gaza as hate marches. Now, I absolutely recognise the unacceptability of some of the signs that were carried, some of the slogans that were chanted, and some of the characterizations. Most disgustingly, I think, from where I've been sitting, the two women with pictures of hang gliders on their back, who have now, of course, been arrested. So the number of arrests and the fruits of the Daily Mail desperately searching for evidence of malfeasance, I'm afraid, prove that the description as almost entirely peaceful protests against the continuing killing of civilians in Gaza is simply accurate. It's not an opinion, it's counting. It doesn't dilute in any way the disgustingness of some of the things that a tiny minority of people have said or have written down on slogans, but in terms of peace, as the opposite of violence, they have been almost entirely peaceful protests. Considerably more peaceful, for example, than protests against student fees that saw the son of a Pink Floyd member jailed for defiling the cenotaph, and protests against the fox hunting ban, which saw considerably more people arrested and considerably more police officers attacked. This is important. This is not to dilute, as I stress, the despicable nature of the exceptions to the general rule of peace and civilization on these marches. It is simply to point out that something very strange is happening. Something very strange is happening, and it is happening at the behest of the Home Secretary, whose job is to safeguard the security of the British people. Her job is to work to minimise the likelihood of violence and disruption. And I am going to suggest to you this morning, with a very heavy heart, that Suella Braverman is quite clearly and quite deliberately doing the precise opposite. It was suggested on Newsnight last night by a fella who used to be the independent faith advisor that she is actually desperate to get fired. I didn't see the interview. Someone's just referenced the clip for me now. Colin Bloom is his name. Former independent faith engagement advisor. He says the Home Secretary's language is goading Number 10 into firing her so that she can launch her leadership campaign early. We know because she breached the ministerial code by leaking sensitive documents to him that she's very much in cahoots with one of the sort of maypoles of hard right thinking, hard right rhetoric on the backbenches of the Conservative Party, so that the idea that there is a sort of putative leadership campaign in waiting is pretty hard to resist. But the job of the Home Secretary is supposed to be to pour oil on waters. To pour oil on waters. And I think she's doing the opposite. Well, she is doing the opposite, isn't she? She's categorically and clearly doing the opposite. Because if you take, give or take 100,000 people, and they march through the streets of London almost entirely peacefully, the Home Secretary, whose job is to not only keep the peace and promote the peace, the public peace, Her job, of course, is also to protect everybody equally. You can't have a Home Secretary who prioritises one section of society over another. I think that she is deliberately pouring petrol on the protests. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to contribute to this conversation. But of course, you can't contribute yet because we haven't actually got to the question. And the question hinges upon what Suella Braverman is actually doing. Okay? So I understand why some people are desperate to avoid that question, because the answer is pretty obvious. There is nothing entailed by inquiring after why she would be seeking to pour petrol upon this situation, a situation that is not, in Britain, particularly inflamed. But the idea that protesting against the continuing bombardment of Palestinian civilians constitutes a hate march seems to me to be rather more serious than perhaps we clocked at the time. And the reason why I think it's rather more serious than we clocked at the time is because, and I stress categorically that I hope I'm wrong, I think she wants violence. I have seen one or two commentators almost calling for violence on the streets. So you take a peaceful protest and you encourage people to attack it. I know that one or two of the arrests that have unfolded, the small number of arrests that have unfolded, have involved attacks upon the people marching. And you know, we keep calling them protesters. The massive majority of people marching are marching for peace, so they are protesting, if that's the verb you insist on using, essentially against violence, against death, against bombing. And even if you think they shouldn't be doing that, or you completely disagree with them because you do believe that it is somehow plausible that Hamas can be eradicated by bombing Gaza into oblivion, and that there is no death toll too high among Palestinian civilians that to render the attack unjustified. It's important, I stress again, that position exists. It's the position, I think, of the Israeli government, and a lot of supporters of the Israeli government do not believe that there is a figure too high. They insist, and I presume they believe, that the eradication of Hamas is not only plausible, which I can't see myself, but is also a goal so devoutly to be wished that there is no death toll of Palestinian civilians so high that it would render that goal unworthy or unnecessary. So literally 1 million dead Palestinians would still be a price worth paying for the apparent eradication of Hamas. Now, if you could prove to me that it would achieve the apparent eradication of Hamas, I would have to allow you at least logic. I don't think you'd have much of a moral dimension necessarily, but you would at least have a form of logic or a form of logistical rationale for your belief. But Benjamin Netanyahu seems to me to be almost uniquely unequipped to foment confidence that they really do have a plan beyond bombardment, or that bombardment is likely to actually somehow wipe out resentment, Hamas-style resentment of Israeli policies in a single military campaign. So the question is, what do you think Suella Braverman is doing? I want to hear from people going on or planning to go on the march, because here's another thing that I think is going to happen. I think that if the Metropolitan Police intelligence is that anti-protest protests are in the offing, then the pressure to postpone it will become even greater. So in other words, violent people planning to attack a peaceful protest will be the reason why the peaceful protest gets postponed. I think Suella Braverman would claim that as a win. And I think that if there is violence, it will be caused, whether deliberately or not, by people like her describing it as a hate march. Because let me tell you what happens. And I don't think privilege is quite the right word, but I have the dubious ability on Twitter. I haven't quite blocked enough people from the more disgusting fringes of social media. I can see it actually happening. So if I say, for example, that Suella Braverman actually wants people to attack this march on Saturday, I can see people responding to that by saying, damn right, and we should. We should attack it. So by calling it a hate march, she creates the idea in the minds of people who are either Islamophobic or just looking for a scrap. By calling it a hate march, she very, very deliberately creates the idea that it is something which must be resisted. And this bizarre adoption of the poppy as a symbol of contrariness to the peace marches is very much of a piece with that, I think. By somehow trying to cast people calling for an armistice, calling for a cessation of bombing in Gaza as enemies of the poppy and all of the emotional heft that the poppy can be imbued with, often by quite cynical and dishonest people. But the poppy is a beautiful symbol of peace in a way, but more importantly of sacrifice. And somehow they're desperate, absolutely desperate, to turn the poppy into something that the people marching for peace on Saturday are apparently opposed to. I have seen no evidence of that. And even if you found me one headbanger doing bad things at a war memorial, it would have no bearing whatsoever upon the other 999,000 people poised to take to the streets of London tomorrow. I beg your pardon, on Saturday. So if she is not trying to turn it into some form of war by calling it a hate march, what is she trying to do? Question number one, 0345 6060 973. If she doesn't want a scrap, why has she portrayed 100,000 people as hate-filled? Why has she done it? 0345 6060 973. I'm also struck by the absurdity, not for the first time in my life, of the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Because we're all taught that, aren't we, from childhood, until you start inhaling the Daily Mail on a daily basis, at which point words apparently become even more dangerous and hurtful than actual violence or than sticks and stones. So why has she done it? Why has she called it a hate march? If you're going on it, or planning to go on it, how unreasonable would it be for me to say, do you think you'll be wearing a poppy? I'm fascinated. We may get onto this a little later, because I think the Braverman angle is actually the most urgent. What is this? What is this bizarre conflation of the poppy with opposition to the peace march? 16 minutes after 10 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If not to stoke up hatred, why has she called it a hate march? 0345 6060 973. Because I say to you with quite a heavy heart that she is deliberately trying to stir things up. Deliberately. It's almost as if she's watched these marches unfold in an almost entirely peaceful fashion, albeit that if vile things are shouted, then the law must be enacted. But she's watched these marches unfold in a almost entirely peaceful fashion, more peaceful than student loan marches, more peaceful than anti-fox hunting marches, and she's actually actively disappointed. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 20 minutes after 10, not for the first time, we're wondering what Suella Braverman is up to. Not in terms of leadership jostling necessarily, although that's part of the answer, no doubt, but specifically with regard to watching an almost entirely peaceful march. And I'm not going to apologise for repeatedly adding at this point, albeit one completely marred by the shouting of disgusting words and slogans. But why would she call all of those people hate-filled? Why would she call it a hate march? What's her plan? What's the goal? What's the win? Because it seems to me that if those people were to come under attack from Gammon dressed as patriot, then she'd consider that a job well done. Abid is in Manchester. Abid, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. First of all, thank you for your programme and the approach and, giving sanity a voice.
Thank you. Oh, lovely thing to say. I do my best.
The reason she's doing this is it's this moving towards a divisive culture, society, whatever you want to call it. I mean, obviously, there's a whole leadership jostling that you mentioned, but really it's, if you look at that whole UK talk, Teletubbies TV, whatever it's called, you have these very right-wing people saying very right-wing and divisive things. She's part of that crew.
Yes.
The rhetoric just gets more.
But this is culture war, deliberate culture war. And I mean, bizarrely, sometimes, in fact, on this issue, they've ended up fighting with each other, even at cabinet level. The problem with the culture war is once you start it, you don't get to control where it goes or where it stops. But she's clearly doing something along those lines. To what end?
Well, I mean, obviously leadership, why do horrible people do horrible things? And I don't mean that in a kind of frivolous way. Why did, dare I say Nazis? I don't know if I want to go down there, so I apologise. But, the rhetoric that was called out in Germany back in the 30s, why do these people say these things? I mean, I just want to add, right, so I was on these marches 4 times. I'm not a march type of person. I like to sit at home, geek out, watch my TV and play games and hang out with my kids.
What are you playing at the moment?
Spider-Man.
I knew you were going to say that. Spider-Man 2, yeah? The second one. Yeah, I absolutely knew you were going to say that. I'm thinking of getting a console just to get stuck into that. I haven't really played since the kids were born, but they look after themselves these days, so I'm thinking of getting back into it.
And I'm a 51-year-old guy.
Look at
the
that.
Only reason I have the console is for that. Yes. And my daughter, who's 12, she kind of calls me out for that. Anyway,
we digress.
Yeah, we do digress. Listen, right. So we were on these marches, and peaceful, and we've got our signs, and it's all about war. What is it good for? All of that stuff. And there are 4 dots in that sea of people in London a few weeks ago, in Manchester, because that's where I'm from.
Yes. And
we're going to be there this week. And I just want to say something really important, right? I didn't want to go because this whole thing is really depressing me. I'm switching, putting filters. Well, I was thinking of putting filters on my internet so I don't see anything about Palestine and Israel.
Yeah.
But I saw that. I think it was 200 people outside the Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island. It was a peace sit down. And there were Jewish people there, right, saying war is bad, people are dying. And I felt like, look, if there are Jewish people there calling this out, I should do that. Right. I should do the right thing and drag my family down to London and just be 4 dots, hopefully, in a large group of people to say peacefully, on Armistice Day, war was bad, war is bad, let's stop it. And let's have a ceasefire.
And if that makes you naive, and I don't personally think that it does, but if that makes you naive, there are 1,000,001 worse things to be in this world than naive and or idealistic. So quite how that, you become a hate marcher, is something that Suella Braverman, I suspect, would struggle to explain, and I doubt anybody honest or decent will get the opportunity to ask her any time soon. Abid, is it? I mean, how? I apologise for this because it's a bit facile, but would you wear a poppy?
Hey, I hadn't even thought about that, but you mentioned it. I don't know what the rhetoric about
I don't either.
Think is.
No.
And I will if it helps to say I believe in peace, and I won't if it helps to say I believe in peace.
Well, I can't help thinking that even if it makes no impact at all, the more poppies that people see on the march on Saturday, the more ridiculous this attempt by the Daily Mail to turn it into a battle between people who want Palestinians to stop being bombed and people who respect and even revere the power of the poppy would just look ever more ridiculous. Thank you, Abid. It's 10:25. Safina is in Luton. Safina, what would you like to say?
James, thank you for everything that you've done on your platform. I called you this morning because I actually declined to give my son some change this morning. I didn't say no. I kind of brushed him off.
Why?
So I just felt
change for a poppy.
Change for a poppy. Why would I feel like that? I'm British born. I've worn one proudly myself before. Never been an issue before. Why is it an issue now? And it's all come down to Suella and the way that she's gone about the situation. And yes, she succeeded. She's caused hate. She's caused hate with her comments. I don't think I will ever be British enough even though I'm born in Luton. I just don't. I currently feel like Muslim lives don't matter. What has that got to do with the poppy? Why do I feel like that? Why do I feel guilty knowing that my children are safe in bed in 2023 and there's children under rubble? And that's what breaks my heart. And it's just so sad. When the Ukraine crisis happened, we all supported Ukraine openly. And there's so much similarities, but the only difference is the geography. And that's the saddest part that breaks my heart, that in 2023 we have children dying. And majority of them are children, innocent children, yet we can't do nothing. We can't even peacefully march because that would be considered hate.
I was about to say, well, you still can as things stand, but of course you can't do it without being labelled a hater or a hate marcher by the Home Secretary, whose job used to be to keep the peace. I think you should have given your son the change, Safina.
I've still got till Friday. Maybe my heart might change. Maybe I might make that change. But I'm just trying to explain to you.
No. I fully understand. I completely understand. But that means that you're giving her the win.
For someone in power, she should be more wiser.
5.5 million Muslims on the Allied side during World War II.
I know.
1.5 million died. By far the biggest religious contingency of the British Indian Army. So, I wear my poppy for everybody. I wear my poppy for them. I wear my poppy for Scottish people, American people, English people, Irish people, whatever their religion, whatever their... not that
James,
many Irish
just
people.
Being honest with you, in light of everything that's happening in the world
I completely understand.
right now, I sadly feel that I raised my children in a world...
It's his poppy.
Yeah, it'll be his poppy. Actually,
it has to be.
It was a slap band that he wanted because there's a Remembrance Day slap band that they could put on their arm.
Yes.
And that's what he wanted. But I just felt so sad and thinking...
No, I get it. I completely understand.
What are we going to remember? Is he going to understand? How do I justify
that's part of it, isn't it?
On in the world?
That's part of it. She's trying to co-opt it. They're trying to co-opt it just for... I don't know what word to use here. Just for white people? Is the poppy just for white people? I mean, what is the rationale behind this attempt to portray...
Shall I be honest with you, James? You took the word out of my mouth. That's how I feel.
Well, I
feel I will never be British enough. And
I know a lot of people feeling like that.
I actually have contributed a lot to society, and I do contribute a lot to society, and I raise my children to have British values. But the question now is, in 2023, what is British values? To sit back and watch children die? No. And
even if it is idealistic or naive to call for a ceasefire, I don't think it is. But you're very gracious and Abbot to compliment me on the tightrope that I managed to walk at the moment. I will repeatedly remind you of positions that are different from your own, whether it's the belief that killing 1 million Palestinians would somehow be justified if it led to the eradication of Hamas. Simply to say, let's not do it, should not be controversial. It should not be controversial. And I stress again, I think you gave him a poppy. I really do, because I'm not being glib. I'm not trivialising what you said. Those words there, I will never be British enough. I have heard from people, I've heard from one person in the last 24 hours who has held very, very senior roles in exactly the same political party as Suella Braverman. I've heard almost identical words from them, Safina. So if it's any comfort at all, you are not alone. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 10:34 already. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got two little things buzzing in my brain. One is Suella Braverman. How worried should we be by a woman whose job is literally to keep the peace, apparently seeming to agitate for violence? And the second one is the role of the poppy in this broader process of trying to turn everybody against each other. And just by way of an aside, I'm going to try today to use Threads more than Twitter as the receptacle for your messages to the studio. Rather happily, I have the same handle on both platforms. So if you want to use Threads to send me a message, at Mr. James OB is the handle that you need. I'm just noting, part of the reason for doing that, I'm just noting that PlayStation have announced that they'll be dropping their Twitter/X integration as of November the 13th, 2023, which is just, it's a week, it's on Monday. So imagine getting your hands on a social media platform so influential that it had all three console makers adding a dedicated button to their controller design so you could share, and then messing it up so completely in a year of ownership. That's what Elon Musk has done with Sony's announcement that they're dropping their direct integration with Twitter stroke X, and it's easy to see why. So what's his chops? Musk seems determined to turn it into precisely the sort of sewer that many of us enjoyed Twitter, because in contrast to most of the legacy media, it was not dominated by racism, Islamophobia, and white supremacism. But hey-ho, good luck to him. I'm going to try a little bit more of Threads moving forward. 10:35 is the time. Caroline is in Oxted. Caroline, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for having me on. I got through in the end.
You're most
I'm
welcome.
a bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
I know. I went on the march, not the protest, but the march with the 500,000 the other week. And
Yes.
I just said to your advisor, I said it was so peaceful, humbled me. We were hugged by so many people. Just no anger, just saying thank you. Thank you for listening to us. So that was the one thing I want to say. I am going on Saturday. I am going to take precautions. I live in Oxford, Surrey, so there probably won't be many coming from my way.
Right.
Because on the way back from my last march, someone came up to me and started shouting because they could see I had a Palestinian flag in my bag. Anyway, that's one thing. But,
Well, no, hang on. What did they shout? And what could you? I mean, could you make any observations about what they were likely to believe in or be motivated by?
Yes, he just shouted at me really, really loudly and was pointing, going, "You disgust me. You support, the beheading of innocent babies." I stayed quiet.
Right.
And my partner sort of, bless him, he's in a wheelchair, but tried to come to my defence. And, he had nothing else to say. He was
hate-filled.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. He was boiling with it. I had done nothing. I was walking up. I'm a 52-year-old woman, but stupidly, part of that flag was on show. So this time I won't make that mistake. But what I was saying about Suella Braverman, she has basically sat back. Whoever's put that out in the social media for her has just given the red light.
It's more than that. She said it. She said it repeatedly in interviews. It's not just the social media was comments about the homeless so far. I think were confined to social media, but this is a very deliberate public statement.
Yeah, and what I was saying, I'm not going to name the person's name because I just don't want to give him any credence at all. Okay. But a certain person who is known as in the football world, when all the hooliganism, really severe stuff was going on a few years ago, has made on a social media platform saying, "Sorry, I can't be there, but you guys, don't quote me, but you need to get there." And he's given it all this and said, "You know what needs doing."
He's answering Suella Braverman's call.
Yeah. He's done it, and he just said, "I can't be there, but you know what needs doing." They're trying to disrespect our brilliant nation. He's not even in the country, he can't live here. But, and just literally there in broad daylight calling out for people. And he goes, "And you need to, you know what you need doing, boys." And you and
Abbot and others get labelled hate-filled. So, I mean, it's a bit bleak and it may be a bit simplistic. Are we reaching too quickly for the conclusion that Suella Braverman would actually welcome violence between the people you've just described and the people who would be protesting, marching almost entirely for peace with
I think it absolutely will nail her narrative on making protests illegal. I've seen someone's taking legal action against her today. I saw that on Instagram.
So it's the culture war. It's when the culture war actually gets real in a way, isn't it? When people actually start getting hurt. And I mean, who the hell would want to have would have faith in the idea of Suella Braverman having their back? Well, Caroline, you be careful, please, on Saturday. And I'm going to say this: if you are going to protest, if the protest goes ahead, wear a poppy. Just wear a poppy. It can't possibly do any harm, and it might just do a little bit of good. Maya is in Slough. Maya, what would you like to say?
Hi, I've been to 2 of the marches so far.
Are you a particularly hate-filled person, Maya, may I ask?
No, not at all, not at all. British-born, Muslim Pakistani origin, from the northeast of England. The only time I've marched before was against the poll tax when I was at uni, and I've never marched for anything else since. I think I went on a Nelson Mandela march.
Okay, yes, all right. So the poll tax was, of course, protests were much more violent than anything we've seen so far in the context of this. I'm not suggesting you were responsible for the violence, Maya.
Not at all. And my banner that I had was a little laminated A4 sheet of paper I made at home, said, Hamas are terrorists, Israeli government are war criminals, world is complicit, stand with Palestine.
Okay.
So that was my banner then. I went again on Saturday and I just took the big Palestinian flag. My husband came with me to one of them. He doesn't do marches at all. We're 58-year-old, fuddy-duddies. We don't do marches. Sure. We don't do this sort of thing. But he came with me the first time because he was worried for my safety, and it was absolutely peaceful as anything. I was walking next to an Irish guy with a baby in his buggy, absolutely no problems whatsoever. And on Saturday in Trafalgar Square, it was wonderful to hear Alexei Sale and others. Alexei Sale was reciting a Michael Rosen poem, absolutely beautiful, called Don't Name the Children.
Yes.
Absolutely stunning. I wasn't planning on going on this Saturday, but I am going, and my husband, because he said, Suella Braverman says don't go, so I am going.
That's interesting.
And yesterday I sent out a tweet and a message to my friends, etc., saying, anyone who's going, please wear a poppy, because how many Muslims, Indians, Hindus, Sikhs were killed in the world wars?
Yes.
Millions
of
them.
Yeah, that's a rhetorical question.
Yes. I mean, I didn't agree with the war in Iraq, so, I think maybe a lot of people think wearing a poppy is about. I mean, although having said that, anyone who sacrifices for their country, for fallen soldiers, should be honoured. So I will be wearing a poppy. I will be going. My husband will be going. I will be buying the poppies today to make sure we have them. And it is a peace march. It is not a hate march.
And of course, it is. It's the editor of the Daily Mail trying to turn the poppy into a symbol of hatred.
The editor of the Daily Mail. Okay, right, we won't go there.
No, but it only just occurred to me then that because, as you say, there may have been, it may have had a difficult period during the Gulf War, particularly the second Gulf War, when the perception that British and American or Western soldiers were killing Muslim people for little or no effect or reason. But you're quite right. Winston Churchill, I don't know whether you know this, Winston Churchill wrote to Franklin Roosevelt in March 1942 and said, we must not on any account break with the Muslims, who represent 100 million people and the main army elements on which we must rely for the immediate fighting.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, he thought of them as fodder anyway.
Well, that's true.
But that's another point.
That's a conversation for another day. Maya, thank you. And be careful, because if it does go ahead and if Suella Braverman's call is heeded, then there will be people there who wish you harm, despite the fact that you wish clearly and obviously nobody harm. 10:43 is the time. The state opening of Parliament will commence shortly. It is one of those moments of epic and almost unbelievable pomp. I don't know how you respond to it. It depends on my mood. It really does. Some days I can get quite caught up in it all, almost as a historical theme park that is rather mesmeric and rather splendid and spectacular to watch. Other days I find the whole thing completely ridiculous. I struggled during the cost of living crisis to square the sight of, someone wearing a bejeweled hat, moving through streets that people sleep on in tents that the Home Secretary wants to confiscate. There is a real poor man, rich man in his castle, literally poor man at his gate. Flavour to all of that, but I mean, very few countries, if any, do pageantry quite as well as we do. The question of whether or not I talk you through what is happening at the moment has probably already been answered. That seems unlikely to occur, but we will definitely be taking the entire speech live. King Charles this morning finds himself in a really strange situation, if early reports are to be believed, in that Rishi Sunak continues to bet most of the House on the rowing back of environmental policies, or what we could call eco-friendly policies, or net zero policies, after that very, very narrow and unexpected victory in the Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election caused by the depravity of Boris Johnson finally being acknowledged by his own party. The entire policy platform seems to have been, or a large part of it seems to have been, calling off or promising to fight against a non-existent war on motorists. And we saw yesterday that Sadiq Khan's polling has gone bonkers. He's 25% of the Conservative candidate now. So the idea that Uxbridge and Ruislip, because of ULEZ, changed the game or changed the electoral arithmetic for the Tories is looking extremely flimsy. And yet King Charles today will find himself in the position as one of the country's leading and earliest environmental campaigners. He finds himself in the position of having to announce measures that could be fairly clearly seen, if early reports are correct, as being the polar opposite of what he believes should be done. So it's interesting in a fairly grim way for that reason alone. 10:48 is the time. Paul writes on Threads, I'm Irish, I'm 56, I've never been on a march before, but I will on Saturday. I'll be marching for the innocent on both sides. No normal person supports Hamas's attack, but equally the same with Israel's breaking international law and killing in Gaza. And then you mentioned the kind of people who will be hoping for violence on the day from what we loosely describe as the far right. And I, Paul, will add to that by including Suella Braverman probably in that category. Nick says it brings back memories of the poll tax riots. A peaceful demonstration gaining huge momentum over the weeks previous was then baton charged and incited to riot. So overnight, poll tax demonstrators became poll tax rioters. I don't have the history, Nick. I'll take your word for it. But if it's true, your analysis, then I'm afraid I fell into the trap of believing the official narrative on that. I fully expect infiltrators to be present and disruptive this coming weekend in an effort to fit Braverman's fascistic narrative. Quite a few people picking up on this, but Nathan picking up on the white poppy. He tells us that the red poppy officially or technically is only in remembrance of British military personnel who've died in war. It's not for Allied soldiers or enemy soldiers or even civilians from either side. So, for example, civilians killed in the Blitz, whereas the white poppy is in remembrance of all people who've died in war, of any nationality, whether civilian or military, and therefore seems more appropriate in these times. Whatever floats your boat, I would say. I think most people who wear the traditional poppy are kind of imbuing it with their own sentiments and feelings of compassion rather than the technically official version. But Nathan makes a good point nonetheless. 10:50 is the time. Ali is in Watford. Ali, what would you like to say?
Hi, just want to give an additional compliment on what you and your team are doing. It's a great service to the country and you're walking the tightrope really well.
Thank you.
I completely agree. Suella Braverman is effectively employing Trump-style culture wars in this country. I think she's losing the general public when it comes to wanting a ceasefire and calling them hate marches, all these messages of Islamophobia and xenophobia, and just the way that she's linking it is an attack on Armistice Day is just a way of winning that public sentiment back. But just something to add to anyone who's listening, Oxfam are calling for a ceasefire, Save the Children, Amnesty. Is she going to start calling them hate organizations? It's getting a bit silly.
United Nations as well, I think.
United Nations, indeed.
Secretary General. Yeah. I'll read you a text, and you don't have to respond to it because I don't like ambushing people. But it raises a point that many people subscribe to. Israel was in a ceasefire before the October the 7th massacre. Israel, like any country, has a right to defend itself against terror, rocket fire. Israel does not want anything other than to protect itself. These hate marches are not peaceful and go completely against British values. Vandalism and incitement of hate is not acceptable just because the uneducated join in en masse, I think, is meant there. If the massacre was in England, we wouldn't be having these demonstrations. So that is a point that must be considered, and it is very much of a piece with the kind of sentiments to which Suella Braverman is appealing. So how would you respond to that, Ali?
I mean, it's a big topic. I'd say that if the hostages were being kept in Israel, I don't think they'd be carpet bombing Tel Aviv. There's no symmetry in that. It's a completely big topic. The UN Charter also doesn't apply when it comes to occupied territory, but it's a really big topic. What I really want to talk about is the poppy because it's something I'm passionate about.
Go on.
Because I'm wearing a poppy right now, and I'll be wearing it on Saturday. And the reason is, I grew up in this country learning about the sacrifice that our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers made in the world wars. And actually, if anything, if you're marching against genocide, you're honouring them and their fight against genocide during the world wars.
Yeah, genocide is a very provocative and definitely disputable description of what is happening in Gaza at the moment. You could certainly uncontroversially describe yourself as marching against the bombing of civilians, the indiscriminate bombing of northern Gaza.
The indiscriminate bombing of civilians, if that is the terminology that...
genocide is very loaded and quite... I mean, I don't think it does actually apply in these circumstances, but we can have different opinions on that. I prefer to confine the conversation
taking the messaging away. I think it's more important about what it is, rather than the particular word. I can obviously roll back, but I think that's what makes this country great, is that we honor lest we forget not just their sacrifice, but also the message of their sacrifice. And that is that we stand up against things that we see as being wrong, not just in this country, but around the world. And you can look at different levels of foreign policy, but we're talking about the soldiers, the real people, and the real people who sacrificed their lives. So I don't.
And nobody owns that, do they? Nobody owns that. Particularly the more understanding you have of international history, or the more understanding you have of the British Indian Army and other forces fighting with the Allies, the dafter it becomes to see the poppy as something that one section of society has a monopoly on, or has a unique hold on. But I think that is to whom she is speaking. I think that is what she wants to do. We will definitely be having a conversation about that element later in the week, if not later in the day. But as I mentioned earlier, the state opening of Parliament is underway, and we are, as things stand, to take the King's speech in its entirety. So stand by for that. Thank you, Ali. From Watford to High Wycombe. Sheila is there. Sheila, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you.
We'll see.
I went on the march last weekend. I was feeling very sad and alone, actually, and I just felt I really needed to be with like-minded people and show my support, and had a really heartfelt time there. I mean, there was people handing out food that they had made, and everyone was in good spirits and solidarity, and it was lovely to see the mix of children, different faiths, families, and there was a family block, which was lovely. Right. A group of families can go if they feel intimidated by the larger crowds. And all of that was fine until on my way home, when I was on the train, and most of us on the train had been at the march, and there was lovely family next to me, a little girl with her face all painted, and two older women on the train felt emboldened to shout Hamas in my face.
Gosh.
To point at the pin. I had a pin that said Free Palestine. And I could tell that something was brewing. They were just staring at me in that way that you feel something is coming. And
would they, just to clarify, forgive me, were they accusing you of supporting Hamas, or were they expressing support for Hamas?
No, they were to clarify, they were accusing me of supporting Hamas, just with my pin that said Free Palestine. And I was really taken aback, and I'm not scared of confrontation in general as a person. Most that know me would say that.
Okay.
But I was so sad, and my only response to them, everyone was quiet, and they were smirking at me and just sort of pointing, oh, you support Hamas.
God.
And I just asked them, I said, why would you say that? And I just, I was so upset and taken aback by how blatantly rude it was, but just their boldness to do that. And there was a little girl next to me, so I thought I better mind my language.
Yes, well done.
But all I said was, you really need to educate yourself. This is so inappropriate, wrong.
Yeah, but it goes all the way to the Home Secretary. I think calling it a hate march is part of the process of conflating expressing compassion for civilians being bombed with supporting a terrorist atrocity or a death cult, or however you prefer to describe Hamas. It's not an accident, is it, when you bring Suella Braverman's words into it, that people have fallen for the conflation. And listen, it's important to stress, Sheila, that Jewish people feel hugely intimidated. Many Jewish people feel hugely intimidated and concerned and frightened by these gatherings. Many people do feel
absolutely.
That it entails somehow a failure to condemn the Hamas atrocity.
And I think, Braverman is not serving them as well right now with this rhetoric, because what it's doing is providing this sort of blanket cover. I think that, the worldwide support for a ceasefire is an embarrassment to my home country, Canada, as well, and to the UK and to the US. And I think in order to deflect from that embarrassment and shame, they are turning people against each other like they always do. And that is people who support Palestine, that's Jewish people, everyone, because it serves their political purpose for people to be at odds with each other. And it's disgusting. absolutely disgusting to see it.
Actually, Hugo Rifkind, who is one of the most thoughtful writers in the business this morning, makes some of those points under the headline, British Jews should beware illiberal allies, referring to the kind of attitudes that you refer to. And then, of course, the idea that if these protests were to be banned, then in some ways, some people, not you clearly, it would once again be British Jews in the metaphorical firing line, getting the blame for the protest being banned. So that British Jews who are not keen to see the protest postponed still get lumped in with the apportioning of blame for the essential suspension of free speech, for the suspension of the right to peaceful protest, which, not to be glib, probably on the list of things that distinguished us from the Nazis in the Second World War, wouldn't you think? The right to peaceful protest, the right, for example, to criticise government politicians in the strongest terms, the right to call for ceasefires, to call for peace. I don't know what would have happened to you in Nazi Germany if you were condemning a senior politician, or you were demanding a cessation of hostilities, or you were speaking out against government policy, but I suspect that you'd have got a much easier ride of it in the UK, and therefore, thank God, the Allies won. But here we are, hearing politicians, senior politicians, seeking to essentially pour petrol upon already very, very dangerous territory. It is 3 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to do something now, which I think I might cautiously suggest is one of the reasons why you listen to this programme. I'm not sure you'll hear it or find it anywhere else. I'm going to talk to you a bit about a bloke called John Hayes, who is reportedly Suella Braverman's mentor. And he's very much on the right wing of the Conservative Party. He is the bloke to whom Suella Braverman was leaking sensitive documents when she was found to have broken the ministerial code, something which I believe she subsequently lied about. I tell the story in some detail in my new book, How They Broke Britain. But that's by the by. It's just an indication of, well, A, how stupid she is, because one of the people that she sent the sensitive documents to, she did so in error. That's how the story came out. She thought she was sending the documents to him, this John Hayes character, and his wife, who I think works for him. But she accidentally sent it to someone else, and it was they who brought the clear breach of the ministerial code to the attention of the chief whip. Of course, it was a breach so egregious that she was compelled to resign. But Rishi Sunak reinstated her just a few days later. So this is Suella Braverman's mentor, and it's not the word that I would use. And this is a story from 3 years ago when he was called out by Jewish and anti-racism groups for indulging in what is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now, he's not unique in using the phrase cultural Marxism or cultural Marxist dogma. Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, has been deploying it in his newspapers and indeed in speeches for many, many years, as many, I think, as 20, something else that I cover in my new book, How They Broke Britain. And these are people who are currently combining to condemn anybody minded to protest against the continuing bombardment of Gaza. They profess, of course, to be friends of Israel. That article I referred to earlier by Hugo Rifkind in the Times today, talking about the dangers of allying with the illiberal right, contains this phrase, which is very relevant. People have the right to march against falling bombs, no matter who is dropping them. And I cannot suppress my horror at the idea of the Jewish community being used as a pretext for taking this right away. So just a suggestion that some of the loudest voices opposed to these marches may not actually belong to people who are proper friends of Jewish people. And that comes from one of the country's most prominent Jewish journalists. So cultural Marxism, in case you don't know, is a very right-wing conspiracy theory with deep and profound anti-Semitic origins. It centers on the idea that Jewish thinkers, mostly Jewish thinkers from something called the Frankfurt School of Philosophy, represent some sort of fifth column who want to undermine Western values. Are you hearing any little bells tinkling in the background yet? Hasn't Suella Braverman been talking about criminalising the undermining of Western values? lately. So this is an anti-Semitic trope. And as a member of, I think what do they call themselves? The Common Sense Group or the Anti-Woke Coalition? I'm not sure. But they wrote to the Telegraph, I think, 3 years ago, because the National Trust was publishing more history of its properties. I'll say that again because it remains controversial. People like this chap, John Hayes, who is a proud deployer of the anti-Semitic phrase cultural Marxism and is apparently the mentor of Suella Braverman, also has a problem with the National Trust publishing too much history of its own properties. So they wrote that they want to, quote, speak for the silent majority of voters tired of being patronised by elitist bourgeois liberals whenever issues such as immigration or law and order are raised. That in response to the idea of a stately home that was built in large part with money raised from slavery, containing information on its premises that it was built with money raised in large part from slavery. I mean, good God, the controversy, the horror is almost unbearable. And here is the mission statement contained in the letter: to ensure that institutional custodians of history and heritage tasked with safeguarding and celebrating British values, there it is again. We'll have a conversation later this week about what the difference is between British values and French values or German values or Swedish values or whatever values, whatever country you may hail from. What are peculiarly British values? Because people like this, Suella Braverman's mentor, are convinced that they exist, and they add, are not coloured by cultural Marxist dogma. Interesting choice of word there, isn't it? The group's mission is to ensure that institutional custodians of history and heritage are not coloured by cultural Marxist dogma, which they claim is colloquially known as the woke agenda. So there it is. Now, over to Dr. Edie Friedman, who's the Executive Director of the Jewish Council for Racial Equality. And she told Vice News that it was not acceptable for politicians to use the term cultural Marxism, adding this has been promoted on the far right as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory and has a dog whistle effect. Again, this is Suella Braverman's mentor. She adds, no political party should be making use of tropes which reinforce racist, Islamophobic or anti-Semitic sentiments to support particular arguments and policies. Politicians have a responsibility to use language in such a way as to bring people together rather than exacerbate divisions. David Lawrence from Hope Not Hate, the anti-extremism research group, added, cultural Marxism is a conspiracy theory inflected with anti-Semitism and is commonly employed by the far right. It has even appeared in the manifestos of mass murderers. He's quite right. And this wasn't the first time that John Hayes, who was the lead signatory of that Telegraph letter, deployed the phrase. He wrote in the Daily Express that same year, and I quote, for such cultural Marxists, identity must always be defined by a sense of grievance. People who spend their entire lives articulating their own deep and largely bogus sense of grievance, often wealthy, privileged, heterosexual white men, in this case with a knighthood, they're the real victims in our society. They're the truly oppressed members of British society. On this occasion, he was attacking a museum for wanting to provide more history of the exhibits contained within the museum. So I think it's important to recognise that these are not necessarily people who have been completely open and transparent with you. When Suella Braverman claims that the marchers are hate marchers, and her mentor routinely deploys the phrase cultural Marxism, it leaves certainly a certain amount of room for confusion. And funnily enough, when she was a backbench MP, guess who used the phrase cultural Marxism at an event about Brexit organised by the Eurosceptic headbangers, the Bruges Group? Any thoughts on that? Guess who used the anti-Semitic phrase cultural Marxism when speaking to fellow headbangers at the Bruges Group in about 2019? Yeah, Suella Braverman. But it was only the Board of Deputies of British Jews who called on her to clarify her remarks and called for her not to use the phrase again. It's not, of course, the only time that Suella Braverman has been asked to moderate her language or clarify her remarks. A woman called Joan Salter did so last year at a constituency meeting in Fareham, where Suella Braverman remains the MP. And Joan Salter is, well, she's a Jewish Holocaust survivor. And she asked the Home Secretary to stop using language that remind her, Joan Salter, of the language used by the Nazis that killed her family in the 1930s. Suella Braverman's response was to say no. I will not change the language that I use. I will not moderate the vocabulary I deploy, despite the fact that it reminds you, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, of the language that the Nazis who murdered your family were using in the 1930s. 2018, Jewish organisations called for the Conservative Party to investigate after a bizarre propaganda booklet making reference again to cultural Marxism was distributed at the party's annual conference. It did something that is more common, perhaps, than the kind of rhetoric we're seeing this week. It married Islamophobia with anti-Semitism in reference to something called the Great Replacement Theory, which was available at fringe meetings held by, wait for it, the Eurosceptic pro-Brexit think tank, quotes, the Bruges Group. So, I mean, it could be a complete coincidence, and it could be the case that despite deploying anti-Semitic tropes publicly on several occasions in the past, both Suella Braverman and her mentor have repented of such. Perhaps she will even offer a retrospective apology to the Jewish Holocaust survivor Joan Salter for continuing to deploy language that the Jewish Holocaust survivor Joan Salter found reminiscent of the language deployed by the Nazis who murdered their parents. But when Suella Braverman comes forward and talks about the people marching in the hope of seeing a cessation of the bombardment of Palestinian civilians as hate-filled or hate marches, you I would suggest, have to wonder what precisely she's doing and who precisely she is appealing to. And that is just one bloke on the radio providing you with information that is publicly available but not very widely reported, given that much of the newspaper market is dominated by people who are probably very comfortable with Suella Braverman's peculiarly toxic brand of ignorant provocation, up to and including the Daily Mail, which remains an unreliable news source, according to Wikipedia's own internal judgments. And that's the state of the nation. That's the backdrop to the horrors that are unfolding at the moment. That's the context for the attempts by a Home Secretary historically charged with keeping the peace and promoting harmony amongst the people of these islands, deliberately and transparently trying to foment violence, division and hatred. Because when Suella Braverman calls it a hate march, she is blowing a whistle. A dog whistle, perhaps, but I'm not so sure that the shrill tone is actually inaudible to all but her fellow travellers. She is blowing a whistle designed to muster a response. And as one caller has already told us, in the Islamophobic football hooligan community, they know exactly what form they want that response to take, and I'm fairly persuaded that Suella Braverman does too. Why else call it a hate march? You can say there are hateful people on a peaceful march. You can say there are disgusting people on a peaceful march. You can say that we have seen evidence of at least 2 supporters of a terrorist atrocity upon an otherwise peaceful march featuring 100,000 people. But if you call it a hate march, you're making a call to arms. If you're too stupid to understand that that's a possibility, that counts as a valid defence. But not after it's been pointed out to you. You call it a hate march, you're making it a call to arms. And if you marry it to some of the newspaper coverage that is being published at the moment in this country, people who feel or profess to feel a deep reverence for the poppy as a commemoration of our war dead, they are being told that the people on that march hate them, hate you, hate the poppy. That's the message, both subliminal and explicit, and that's what the Home Secretary is doing. And that's why we should all perhaps be very, very concerned that the one of the 4 highest offices of state traditionally dedicated to domestic harmony and peace appears to be embarked upon provocation and rhetorical pyromania. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The King's speech will be underway in approximately 16 minutes. Everything appears to be on time. I'll take 1 or 2 more calls on the conversation we're currently having about Suella Braverman. And then we'll catch up with Natasha Clark about what is likely or not likely to happen in the state opening of Parliament. And if you're very lucky, we'll probably have a few minutes of either me or Natasha and me, desperately trying to fill time while various astonishing acts of incredibly anachronistic pageantry unfold before our very eyes, like, golden coaches and men in tights hitting doors with big sticks and stuff like that. It's all very pageantry-tastic. I like nothing more than trying to commentate on these scenes and these events as they unfold before us. There's currently a man mopping his head, mopping his forehead, and they've all got their ermine on in the House of Lords. Their ermine refers to the fur of a ferret that sits around their neck. Check it's a ferret, please. Fact check the ferret. What is an ermine? I think it's a ferret. Might be a stoat. Anyone? It's a stoat, mate, says Eleanor in my ear. There you go. Ferret, stoat, ferret, tomato, many would say. I could do this for the BBC, couldn't I? I could do the official one. Is it an ermine? Is it a ferret? Is it a stoat? Who really cares? It's a small, long, verminous creature whose skin is removed to create pageantry and history in the form of a dead stoat. But I won't do too much of that because some people get quite sensitive about it. Steve's in Weston-super-Mare. Suella Braverman, Steve, have we got a bit carried away? Is this fear that she's embarked upon a very dark path, is it a little bit unduly pessimistic?
Well, I just think she's really just carrying on a normal working practice for her which is Islamophobic. The first time I really got upset by her words was when she was talking about the rapist gangs in the Midlands and how everything revolved around them. Well, the biggest rapist we've had in England is Jimmy Savile, who's had to be white. So let's not go too off message, but certainly the portrayal of those gangs as being Muslims saw the Mail on Sunday, and this is, the Mail on Sunday does not issue corrections or apologies unless it absolutely had to. The Mail on Sunday had to issue a correction over an opinion piece written by the Home Secretary, and when she claimed specifically that almost all child grooming gangs were British Pakistani, which is categorically, clearly and demonstrably untrue, and therefore the press regulator said that her decision to make that claim, to link the identified ethnic group and a particular form of offending, was significantly misleading. But, it puts her in a position of deliberately and consciously trying to appeal to the sort of little Tommy Ten Names fan club, doesn't it? So I'll let your point about Islamophobia stand, and describing it as a hate march fits in, you believe, to exactly the same modus operandi. Yeah, it's a constant thing, and it'll end up with being all the refugees living in tents, and most of them will be Muslim, I suppose, and another hate-filled rhetoric against them. So we'll take their tents away. You're picking up on a couple of stories. Caroline puts it best, I think. She says, so peace rallies are hate marches. Being homeless is a lifestyle choice, and our history, accurate history, is cultural Marxism. Scary times. Where do you stand on the march? Was it something you'd fancy? It's a long way from Weston-super-Mare. Well, I went to one on the 30th, and I thought that I was doing my bit to try and promote. But since then, the situation's got a lot worse. And Suella Braverman saying it's a hate march. I'm an ex-British soldier who served 3 tours in Northern Ireland, so I've got some background in a terrorist organisation type thing. Yes. You can't crush a terrorist organisation; it will just reappear with a different name. Right. So I don't include that. But as I wore my poppy with pride down there when I was on the march, and I walked alongside Jews for Black Lives Matter and Jews for Free Palestine, there was no problem whatsoever. This time I feel I must go back down and wear my poppy again, and even wear my veterans badge to show that I stand with the people of Palestine. Even my wife's going to go down this time. She doesn't usually do things like that because she tries not to
get het up like I do about situations, but she's going to come down and prove to Suella Braverman that we're not all hate-filled, and even veterans who served are not that type of person, and we'll go down and do a peaceful march.
It's an extraordinary situation that she would lump you and all the people you've just described in with a relatively, thankfully small number of people who are clearly possessed of toxic opinions and prepared to share them. I'm not going to get everything right. I'm certainly not going to be able to please all of the people all of the time, but many people, or some people contacting me, wish that it was made clearer on these marches that people also condemn the Hamas terror attacks. I don't know the best way to do that. I don't know how feasible that would be. Or indeed, I don't know whether or not those comments are made in good faith, because it seems to me that condemnation of terror attacks on October the 7th, in the context of a month later to the day, in fact, today is November the 7th, of continuing bombardments of Gaza, it would be quite odd, it'd be quite difficult to call for a ceasefire. Oh, one thing you could do is make it absolutely clear that you also want Hamas to stop firing rockets into Israel, I suppose. But again, unless you're actually carrying a banner that says that, I don't know how you would expect someone like Steve there with his medals and his beret and his poppy. How would you expect him to articulate that? Simply by walking. 25 after 11 is the time. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is here. This is your first time, I think, Natasha, deployed in the very, very important position of filling time until the King starts talking.
Absolute pleasure.
But you can't give away the fact that you're filling time. You have to sound as if this is absolutely crucial and important broadcasting.
It is crucial and important broadcasting.
Quite
and
right.
yes, we're looking at all of these wonderful, glorious pictures of the beautiful, shiny golden throne. Is this what you had in mind?
Perfect. Yeah. How shiny is the throne, Natasha?
I'd say on a scale of 1 to shiny, very shiny. I'd say a good 9 or a 10.
It's a very shiny throne.
This is why I'm paid the big bucks for sure.
It's a very shiny throne. Is there going to be anything substantive, politically speaking, in the speech today?
Not that I am aware of, I don't think. I think it's going to be very much what we already thought that it would be. A lot on crime, a lot on criminal justice, showing that Rishi Sunak is the tough on crime Prime Minister that he's promised us that he will be. A lot on the economy. Obviously, we've got inflation to sort out. The economy's in a bit of a rut. And obviously, the year before in a general election, he needs to show that he is the guy to sort it out. Whether the British public will buy it or not, I'm sure many of our callers will call in and tell us this afternoon about whether they think anything of this King's speech. But it is probably the last one we will get before an election. So it's essentially the last 12 months. What is Rishi Sunak going to be doing in those 12 months before he can go into a general election and say, I've done all of these magical, wonderful things, and this is why you should vote for me again?
I mean, there are all sorts of problems that Rishi Sunak's got, not least, of course, that any problems they pledge to fix are going to be fairly easily portrayed as problems perhaps caused by or a consequence of 13 years of government by the party he currently leads.
Yeah, and that's absolutely his task, is to try and paint himself as, I'm the new guy, I've only been in power a year, and I imagine we'll get a little bit of that from Rishi Sunak when he addresses the Commons later, saying, I've steadied the ship, I've sorted some of these things out. Remember how chaotic it was last year when Liz Truss was here, and actually things are looking a little bit brighter.
Liz Truss was there for 10 minutes, and he was, to be fair to him, he was only Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson, the second highest office of state in the country.
Yeah, I don't think that the British public are going to really buy this Rishi Sunak as the candidate of change thing. I just don't think that after, like you say, 13 years of Tory rule, they're going to be able to come up and say, yes, this is the guy that I want to take me forward into the next election. Because, like you say, he's had such a pivotal role during the last few years of administration.
At every turn. Back to the Palace of Westminster, where the King and Queen make their way in their bejewelled robes to their thrones. This is known as the procession of state at the state opening of Parliament. Do we know who the children are carrying their trains, Natasha Clark?
I'm sorry, I don't know who the children are carrying.
Do we know
trains.
what the name is for the sort of napkin tucked into their collar that they wear? Is there a proper name for that?
I'm sure royal commentators will be able to tell you that. I'm going to
call it a roof. I'm going to call it a roof. A roufet. I'm going to call, and they are wearing white roufets, of course, which can be traced back to the time of Charles II, who would use them often to mop up after having a nice meat pie.
And now
this is the alternative King speech.
This is the real deal, mate. I don't know what you're talking about, alternative. The eco stuff, the King will find himself in the slightly uncomfortable position of having to announce policies that he almost certainly finds personally repellent.
Yeah, the thing to watch out for is when King Charles announces the new law that Rishi Sunak told us was coming yesterday, that he will make the North Sea Oil and Gas Authority hold yearly licence rounds to get more oil and gas out of the North Sea. Obviously, this is his attempt to try and create a really big divide with Sir Keir Starmer, who has said that he will end those oil and gas licences if he becomes Prime Minister.
He'll stop giving out new ones. He won't withdraw any ones that have already been.
Exactly.
So it's not even that big a wedge, is it? I don't know.
I think there will be a lot of people that really do care about this issue.
Do you?
Yeah, no, I do. There's a lot of people on the Green side of the agenda that really.
No, I mean the other side. Sorry to interrupt you. I mean, is it as a vote winner rather than a vote loser? Is it really a big wedge?
I think green issues are a huge wedge for voters. I think that there's a lot.
Oh, hang on, that's it. He is about it. The silence in the courtyard, silence in the street. The brand new King of England is just about to speak. Imminently. There's a gentleman coughing there, and another one.
So actually what we're seeing now is Black Rod. She's going up to the House of Commons. She's going to bang on the door. It's symbolic of the
This is my favourite bit. This is my favourite bit.
It's my favourite bit too, actually.
Don't talk over the bang.
I will not. She's still walking.
It's a long corridor. It's a very long corridor.
It's meant to symbolise the difference between the Commons and the Lords, and the symbolic differences between church and
she is.
And state.
There it is. There's the banging of the rod.
Black Rod, open the door. Black Rod!
Terrifying, isn't it?
Might be a bit deaf.
So this is essentially symbolising her being shut out, but then banging on the door and then finally being allowed in, and then welcoming the MPs from the House of Commons chamber, who will now make their way back into the House of Commons.
To attend His Majesty immediately in the House of Peers.
So this now sees all of the commoners get up and make their way to the House of Lords.
Yep, nice and shiny House of Lords. It's much nicer than the House of Commons chamber.
Is it? Is it? Is that true?
Is. Yeah.
Nicer amenities.
It's gorgeous in there. Yeah, lots of gold and stuff in there. Not amenities like nicer, loos and stuff.
No.
But
that will be standing room only,
screen.
so we're probably still a good few minutes off the speech starting. A good 5 minutes, probably?
About 5 minutes, I think, according to my schedules this morning. So we're going to have to fill for another 5 minutes.
It's not filling, we're providing capacious, historically rooted commentary. I saw Matt Hancock there looking quite disconsolate.
This is actually probably, I take back what I said about Black Rod. This is my favourite bit. What we're seeing is MPs awkwardly having this conversation as they make their way over from the House of Commons to the Lords. It's actually not very far. It's, I don't know, sort of 30-second, a minute walk. But you'll see Rishi Sunak having an awkward chat with Keir Starmer. You'll see everybody and their dog making their way over, following this procession. And they're obviously going to be crammed into the Lords, who have obviously been in there all morning. So they've taken up all the seats, and they are old, I guess. So I guess they should get the seats first. But yes, again, symbolic of this difference between the upper chamber and the lower chamber, between the Commons and the Lords. So yes, they're all rushing to get in there to try and get a good spot, so they can try and stand at the back and get their glimpse of King Charles.
Starmer and Sunak doing a very good job of looking quite friendly there.
Look at this. They almost look like they could be friends.
Don't they?
On another planet.
Proper bants.
What do you think they're talking about? What you doing for Christmas?
Could
what
be.
you doing for
football,
Christmas?
Football, maybe. I mean, that's what
Maybe
men
football.
do, as I'm
They
sure
do
you know. They are both proper football fans. Not just men. Crikey, a bit of casual sexism there. But emotionally, men who don't like talking about their feelings talk about football a lot.
It's true, and you're right. They both men do share a love of football. Rishi Sunak, famously a fan of Southampton Football Club, I believe, and Keir Starmer's an Arsenal fan.
This is the content we came for, Natasha. This is the content we came for. Keir Starmer, an Arsenal fan. Arsenal, of course, currently managed by Miguel Arteta, previously by Arsene Wenger and George Graham, among others. Southampton, meanwhile, perhaps never quite scaled the dizzy heights of their North London rivals. But nonetheless, a South Coast club that inspires enormous loyalty from its followers. And now things are calming down a bit in the House of Lords.
So they're taking their positions at the back of the chamber. I don't know if they're going to have a good view. Look, Rishi Sunak is right behind the leader of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle.
Couldn't they, or something?
Lindsay Hoyle is a lot taller than Rishi.
I know, he's not going to see anything.
He's not going to see anything.
I was at King Lear the other night, and a bloke in front of me stood up for the curtain call, which means I didn't get to see Kenneth Branagh at the curtain call.
That's very rude.
It was quite rude. I don't mind if everyone stands up, like if it's a full standing ovation, but it was just literally the only bloke in the theatre on his feet was the bloke standing in front of me. And now the King has been handed his speech. You do this bit, Natasha, it's simple, it's grown up.
Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor.
And members of the House of Commons. It is mindful of a legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better. My minister's focus is on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. My government will continue to take action to bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families, and help businesses fund new jobs and investment. My ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to target by taking responsible decisions on spending and borrowing. These decisions will help household finances, reduce public sector debt, and safeguard the financial security of the country. Legislation will be introduced to strengthen the United Kingdom's energy security and reduce reliance on volatile international energy markets and hostile foreign regimes. This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households. Alongside this, my ministers will seek to attract record levels of investment in renewable energy sources and reform grid connections, building on the United Kingdom's track record of decarbonising faster than other G7 economies. My government will invest in Network North to deliver faster and more reliable journeys between and within the cities and towns of the North and Midlands, prioritising improving the journeys that people make most often. My ministers will strengthen education for the long term. Steps will be taken to ensure young people have the knowledge and skills to succeed through the introduction of the Advanced British Standard that will bring technical and academic routes into a single qualification. Proposals will be implemented to reduce the number of young people studying poor quality university degrees and increase the number undertaking high quality apprenticeships. My ministers will take steps to make the economy more competitive, taking advantage of freedoms afforded by the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union. A bill will be brought forward to promote trade and investment with economies in the fastest growing region in the world. My ministers will continue to negotiate trade agreements with dynamic economies, delivering jobs and growth in the United Kingdom. My ministers will introduce new legal frameworks to support the safe commercial development of emerging industries, such as self-driving vehicles, introduce new competition rules for digital markets, and encourage innovation in technologies such as machine learning. Legislation will be brought forward to support the creative industries and protect public interest journalism. Proposals will be published to reform welfare and support more people into work. My government will promote the integrity of the Union and strengthen the social fabric of the United Kingdom. Working with NHS England, my government will deliver its plans to cut waiting lists and transform the long-term workforce of the National Health Service. This will include delivering on the NHS Workforce Plan, the first long-term plan to train the doctors and nurses the country needs, and minimum service levels to prevent strikes from undermining patient safety. Record levels of investment are expanding and transforming mental health services to ensure more people can access the support they need. My government will introduce legislation to create a smoke-free generation by restricting the sale of tobacco so that children currently aged 14 or younger can never be sold cigarettes, and restricting the sale and marketing of e-cigarettes to children. My ministers will bring forward a bill to reform the housing market by making it cheaper and easier for leaseholders to purchase their freehold and tackling the exploitation of millions of homeowners through punitive service charges. Renters will benefit from stronger security of tenure and better value, while landlords will benefit from reforms to provide certainty that they can regain their properties when needed. My government will deliver a long-term plan to regenerate towns and put local people in control of their future. Legislation will be brought forward to safeguard the future of football clubs for the benefit of communities and fans. A bill will be introduced to deal with the scourge of unlicensed pedicabs in London. My government is committed to tackling anti-Semitism and ensuring that the Holocaust is never forgotten. A bill will progress the construction of a National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre in Victoria Tower Gardens. My government will act to keep communities safe from crime, antisocial behaviour, terrorism, and illegal migration. A bill will be brought forward to ensure tougher sentences for the most serious offenders and increase the confidence of victims. My ministers will introduce legislation to empower police forces and the criminal justice system to prevent new or complex crimes, such as digital-enabled crime and child sexual abuse, including grooming. At a time when threats to national security are changing rapidly due to new technology, my ministers will give the security and intelligence services the powers they need and will strengthen independent judicial oversight. Legislation will be introduced to protect public premises from terrorism in light of the Manchester Arena attack. My government will deliver on the Illegal Migration Act passed earlier this year and on international agreements to stop dangerous and illegal channel crossings and ensure it is the government, not criminal gangs, who decides who comes to this country. My government will continue to champion security around the world, to invest in our gallant armed forces, and to support veterans to whom so much is owed. My ministers will work closely with international partners to support Ukraine, strengthen NATO, and address the most pressing security challenges. This includes the consequences of the barbaric acts of terrorism against the people of Israel, facilitating humanitarian support into Gaza, and supporting the cause of peace and stability in the Middle East. My government will continue to lead action on tackling climate change and biodiversity loss, support developing countries with their energy transition, and hold other countries to their environmental commitments. The United Kingdom will continue to lead international discussions to ensure that artificial intelligence is developed safely. My government will host the Global Investment Summit, the European Political Community, and the Energy Conference, leading global conversations on the United Kingdom's most pressing challenges. I look forward to welcoming His Excellency the President of the Republic of Korea and Mrs. Kim Keon-hee for a state visit later this month. My government will, in all respects, seek to make long-term decisions in the interests of future generations. My ministers will address inflation and the drivers of low growth over demands for greater spending or borrowing. My ministers will put the security of communities and the nation ahead of the rights of those who endanger it. By taking these long-term decisions, my government will change this country and build a better future. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your counsels.
King Charles there concluding his entry into this year's most bored-sounding man in the world competition. We'll have a look at the runners and riders after this. 11:49 is the time. I will read some of the texts, I think, that have come in, because I think that was noticeably low key from King Charles. Basically, every comment is about his delivery coming into the studio, and I noticed not just confined to sort of non-professionals either. Paul Brand over at ITV has tweeted he looks highly sceptical as the long-term environmentalist announces that the government will allow new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. I think it's fair to say that he should make podcasts for insomniacs, says Bill. He was yawning throughout the speech, James, says Sam. It's as if even he knows. Stephen Rochester said, brilliant, James. It's as if even he knows that he's talking rubbish. Gillian Purley says, the King sounded so peed off at having to read out that garbage. I think you'll find I was the most bored during that speech. His Majesty hated every minute of that. We haven't seen him do enough. This is only his second. But we haven't seen him do enough, I don't think, to comment on whether that is actually his normal delivery. But Natasha Clark, before we get on to the content, it was a remarkably unexuberant delivery.
Yeah, it was. He obviously has been training his whole life for this, hasn't he?
Yes. Well, sort of, not for mix. Just that.
Well, this role, this perfect mix of I'm bored but not too bored, and yes. I'm but I think yes, I didn't see him flinch or grimace when he was mentioning climate change, though. I didn't see any particular eyebrow raise or anything to note. And I guess, to be fair, he's had a bit of practice at trying to hide his political views over the year. And obviously we know his views on climate change, we know his views on net zero, and we know he's a proud environmentalist. But I think, to be honest with you, from where I was sitting anyway, I thought he delivered that without really letting that be known too much. That was my take from it.
By essentially sort of delivering it all in an almost unchanging monotone. If you watch it back, I think just at the end of the environmental stuff, I think his teeth are a tiny bit clenched actually, but who knows?
How many times are they going to announce that gas and oil licences are going to continue to be issued? Is that the third time it's been announced or the fourth?
So, to be fair, yesterday they announced that it would be done on a yearly basis. So that was a new bit of information. Rishi Sunak has been very keen to say, yes, I'll continue with this. But this was the first time that he's saying he's going to mandate them to do it on a yearly basis, which, again, like you said earlier, will put Keir Starmer in a bit of a bind because he'll have to go, do I and do it? When I get back to, if I do get into Downing Street, or do I just leave it?
It was actually you who said it would put Keir Starmer in a bit of a bind. I'm not convinced that it will. I think that's obviously the plan, and the newspapers were briefed yesterday to write it as such. The Telegraph and the Mail, the Times, I beg your pardon, and the Mail doing exactly what Downing Street had asked them to do and writing under headlines about how this will make life difficult for Keir Starmer. But I've been looking at these licences and the ones that have been issued in recent years. They hardly ever find anything. So it's very odd politics to say, look, you can dig for oil, you can drill for oil. The likelihood of anything being found before the election after the next election is pretty much zero, and even then, the chances are very slim. So it's more symbolic. It's more saying to big oil companies, you can carry on drilling in the North Sea. So for Keir Starmer to say, well, I won't take away the ones you've already got, but I'm not going to dish out any more, not least because you never find anything. I don't know that I'm not persuaded at all, Natasha, that this is anything like the wedge issue that the Conservatives clearly think it is.
I think in terms of it being a wedge issue, it is. Whether the specifics on oil and gas licences.
There's no one thinking, right, that's it, I'm voting Tory. They're going to keep dishing out licences to oil companies.
No, I agree with you on that one. But I think just in terms of green issues, there are a lot of people in the country that go, should we be going slower on net zero because it's going to cost me a lot of money to change my boiler out. It's going to cost me a lot of money to change my Cairo to electric car. Those are the more of the key issues, and that's what Rishi Sunak is trying to tap into with this.
97% of the conversation about ULEZ that happened in the run-up to the Uxbridge by-election has now disappeared from social media. Paul in Morecambe enjoyed it. He says the best part was when he said long Tom instead of long term. Can you replay that bit, please? I'm not really doing requests today, Paul, but and Rebecca points out, if I remember correctly, the Queen was never exactly enthusiastic either. Did I miss the bit about bins? Was there anything in there about getting rid of multiple recycling bins again?
Didn't see that one. I also didn't see anything about tents, and so obviously Suella Braverman's comments over the weekend about putting fines for people that give out tents to homeless people. Nothing in there. So has it been scrubbed from the King's speech? I can't see anything in any of these documents I'm looking through about it. It says on one of these pages that the government will tackle persistent nuisance and organised begging, but it does not say they will take their tents away. So has there been a bit of a backlash in government to this one?
Well, we know that there has, don't we? There's been a division in cabinet. So would we have realistically expected that specific to be in the speech? Was that the tone? This is your patch, not mine. Was that?
Yeah, it seemed to be.
Yeah,
it seemed to be from the Financial Times report over the weekend. It seemed to be that this is expected as part of this criminal justice package. And obviously Rishi Sunak has talked lots about wanting to clamp down on what he sees as antisocial behaviour, and this was expected to be, at least form a part of this part of the King's speech. But yes, it looks like those details are a little bit scant, and obviously we'll be asking the government later why on earth this has magically disappeared from this package.
Anything that you were surprised, even mildly surprised? Did your eyebrow raise a millimetre at any point during that speech?
To be honest, not really. There's been very little. There's a couple of things in there that I didn't know that were going to be in there. Martin's Law, the law that the government have long talked about, which will force premises to bring terrorism plans to prevent such an attack as Manchester Arena terror attack happening again. We weren't sure if that was going to be in there. That has been promised to be back in this King's speech. So the government will continue with those plans. We feared they might be dropped. Campaigners were getting a bit worried that they might be. Also, the animal welfare bill as well, something that a lot of Conservatives and to be fair, it's actually quite a cross-party issue, wants us to tackle animal smuggling, puppy smuggling being brought in from abroad, and us treating our animals with disdain. That is going to be coming back as well. So those are two things that I didn't know from the King's speech. But what I think is just more interesting is this is obviously being teed up as an election King's speech. What those three things that Rishi Sunak thinks are going to be his main priorities for an election: growing the economy, strengthening society, and keeping people safe. Those are three things that he wants you guys to take away from the King's speech today. He's tried to organise all of it into these big three themes. Will it be enough? Like I say, a lot of it has already been talked about before. There's not a lot new in there. There's no rabbit in the hat like we do expect to see at some of these big state piece set events. Is it going to be enough for people to vote Conservative again in a year's time? Well, I think we know the answer to that.
Yeah, you're right. And indeed, Fegan Murray, our friend, great friend of the programme, will be delighted. Martin's Law, of course, named after her son, Martin Hett, who was killed in that Manchester bombing attack. And I know last time I saw her, she thought it was over the line. So you're right to speak of the relief that fears of some reversal or pause appear to have been completely excised. Incredibly hardworking and very, very inspirational woman. To whom we send our love. It's coming up to 11:58. Back to the pageantry, or would you like to do a tiny bit more politics?
A pageantry. We can go back to the pageantry. We're looking right now at images of King Charles leaving the Palace of Westminster, going back to Buckingham Palace for this whole thing to be over. We have reached the end of the ceremonial aspect. What happens now essentially is that all the MPs go off and have a big long lunch before they come back at 2:30 to actually start to discuss what was in it. And then
in a horse-drawn golden carriage, of course. And the environs of Westminster are at their most spick and span. It's got what I believe the technical term is full flag action underway. Even the clock tower in which Big Ben resides is it looks even shinier than usual. I wonder what happens, Natasha. What I'd really like is one of those cameras that we got when the door closes and Charles and Camilla can that sort of deflation moment where they come, and she says,
wipe their brow and go, oh, thank goodness that was all over for yet another year.
And he says, I can't believe I had to read out that balderdash, absolutely, or whatever it is. And then they sort of have a gin and tonic and put the racing on, I presume. Natasha
Be a fly on the wall for that.
Great stuff. Well done. A lovely sparkling debut on your first moment of major royal import. I have no idea what we'll do next. This is another thing about the major events of state like this. They drive a coach and horses. Aha! Literally. They drive a golden coach and horses through planning a programme or trying to build up some momentum. Get a phone. It's almost like they couldn't give a hoot about me trying to get a phone-in going in a time of really, really grim news. But I'll think of something. That's my job. Just like King Charles's job today was to read out a speech in a way that I'm not sure he could have sounded more bored. It's coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is 3 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we have I've got two guests coming up, actually. So it's going to be quite a strange hour, this. Emily Maitlis will join us from America in half an hour, where she is just sort of surveying the scene a year before that potentially historic election in which the man who tried to inspire a coup against the last winner of American presidential election and continues to lie about having won it is still enjoying considerable support among the population, enough to make it more possible that if he's not in jail, he will be in the White House. After the next election. I refer, of course, to Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. So it is, as they say, all to play for there. And then I think we'll catch up with the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, on the contents of that Queen's speech and possibly some broader issues of the moment as well. So what are we going to do until then? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a conversation that, if it goes well, we can return to later. And if it goes badly, then we've only got half an hour, so it won't matter that much. I'm really interested in this war on the motorist. And I was expecting perhaps a little bit more in the King's speech. It still doesn't quite feel right, does it, saying King? I don't know how long it takes. Does Malcolm Gladwell say you have to do something 1,000 times before it becomes... Or is it 100,000 times? It can't be 100,000 times, can it? Well, you've got to do something 1,000 times before it becomes second nature. If you're trying to train yourself to respond almost reflexively to something, then thousands of times you need to do it. But we've been saying Queen since we were born, almost all of us, actually, unless you're very old. The idea that you, not since we were born, because it goes back to when she became Queen, doesn't it? Not when she was actually born herself. But most of us have been saying Queen all our lives. And still, there's a little jarring. I very, very nearly said Queen's speech. QC and Casey still taking a lot of getting used to in legal circles, of course. I see Casey, I think of the Sunshine Band, but that's possibly showing my age. 5 after 12 is the time. The war on motorists, Rishi Sunak was betting quite a lot on that
after the Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election. You have a Transport Secretary saying that councils shouldn't be able to decide or control when you can and can't go to the shops. But of course he's perfectly comfortable, apparently, because he hasn't spoken out against it, with governments deciding who can and can't march in solidarity with bombed civilians. I would like you to tell me, as a sceptic, I would like you to tell me what this war on the motorist is that I keep hearing about. Because in the run-up to the Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election, I suggested to you that the massive majority of people who were being told that they were going to have to pay a charge to drive into London were being misled. I wanted you to check, really, the arithmetic of it. There was no earthly way that the number of people with non-compliant vehicles would be enough to sway a by-election. And yet you could tell from the way it was covered, and I appreciate it was a particularly specific constituency. The numbers of people in non-compliant vehicles, if you looked at what happened when the first round of the ULEZ was introduced, by Boris Johnson, of course, remember. So again, that got overlooked as well. There was no earthly way that was going to have a meaningful impact on electoral numbers unless a significant number of people in that constituency wrongly believed that ULEZ was going to spank them when it wasn't. And when I started taking calls from people who truly believed that unless you had a fully electric car that you plug in every night to charge up, then you were going to have to pay £12.50 to drive to the shops. That's when I realised, whether it was by hook or by crook, whether it was by fair means or foul, that's when I realised that there was something a little bit crook going on. So what is the war? It's 10,000 hours is the Malcolm Gladwell thing. You're absolutely right. I do apologise. So it was kind of relevant, but at the same time also not. So maybe if you do it 10,000 times, you say king 10,000 times, king, 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 10,000 times, then you won't, in the back of your head, still somehow be saying queen. So perhaps they've stepped back. Perhaps they've realised that very specific constituency was not particularly emblematic of any broader issue, or... And the reason I'm doing this when I've only got half an hour is that traditionally I hate motoring issues, but when they become actually politically relevant, rather than just, have you ever had a parking ticket that was really unfair? Or, they've changed the road layout and I don't like it anymore. So when they become rhetorical devices rather than merely boring conversations about motor vehicles, my ears do prick up a little bit. I do find myself thinking, is that going to work? So when Rishi Sunak describes the war on motorists, what do you think he's talking about? Okay, 0345 6060 973. This is becoming quite a rich theme at the moment for our time together, isn't it? A member of the government says something and we wonder what they really mean. Suella Braverman describes hate marches or calls homelessness a lifestyle choice. And we could spend hours talking with each other about how that plays, what that really means. What do you think Rishi Sunak means when he talks about the war on motorists? And in the absence of any meaningful policies designed to improve the daily experience of the motorist, how electorally significant do you think it is genuinely likely to prove? So hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. What is the war on motorists as opposed to the rather urgent need to reduce the amount of traffic on our roads? Or even actually maybe I'm misspeaking. Maybe the need becomes less urgent the more cars are ultra-low emission zone compliant. Some of the science that's already been released on air quality will no doubt be challenged and questioned and queried, but to my untutored eye, it looks pretty impressive. So is there a war on motorists? But crucially, is it relevant to voting intentions? Most of it's council-based decision-making anyway, isn't it? So what would a government do if it wanted to prove it was on the side of the motorist? Now, I have to stress to you that I have a very real fear this will be an incredibly boring phone-in.
I think that if people are going to ring in and tell me how hard it is to park where they live, or how much longer the school run now takes, then I am going to struggle. I'm going to sound probably a little bit like King Charles delivering the King's speech just a few minutes ago. So in order perhaps to balance things out, perhaps you believe that all talk of a war on motorists is utter nonsense, and it's just yet more evidence of this government essentially seeking to govern by old-fashioned, boring radio phone-ins. They've already kind of adopted it in the arena of some policy areas, and now they seem to be adopting it in the area of motoring as well. So if I was Prime Minister and you said to me, please stop the war on motorists, what would you want me to do? And if you are not remotely interested in any of these issues, then you can answer the question of whether or not you think it's going to have any electoral impact, any electoral significance whatsoever. But I'm warning you now, I will not be shy of expressing my boredom. But that's probably a little unprofessional, given that I'm currently urging you to ring in. Danny's in Croydon. Danny, war on motorists.
Hello.
Here we go.
I'm 18 years old,
right,
and I've started driving since I was 17, and I've had a huge passion for driving, right?
Excellent.
I'm a motorcyclist, I'm a driver, and I work for a huge supermarket, one of the biggest supermarket delivery companies, as a van driver as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say now, there's so many things. I'm all over London now, right? I've been basically everywhere. What I've seen is that this war on drivers is real. This war on motorists is real.
Is it?
And what I see is, I'll be in London, for example.
Yeah.
I'll see... have you seen these? It's not new, but it's quite recent. It's popping up everywhere. It's they'll put two enormous boxes of mud on a road, on a big road, so they can make it thin, and then they'll put signs saying, do not enter here.
Yeah.
But if you go all the way around, you're allowed to enter. But then as a van driver, for example, who's doing deliveries, I have to now U-turn on that road, as thin as it is, and I have to go all the way around. Because if I go through that road, I'll get an £80, well, I don't know how much the fine is, and I'll have to pay it. Now, what I can understand is, I don't know the statistics, I don't want to lie, but I know the government makes a lot of money.
You can if you want. I'm not really paying attention.
No, I know the government makes a lot of money off its fines, right?
Yeah.
Especially traffic fines.
But you've never paid one.
No, because I avoid it as... I mean, I've got...
Well, then it's working.
But I turned right in a... Yeah, but why is that fine? Why is that a finable offence for me to go into a road? Why do I have to go all the way around?
Because they're trying to reduce the amount of traffic on that road, mate.
But they're
people
live
there.
Go all the way around.
Because people live there.
But there's no logic between that.
You just told me that it works.
In London have it.
You just told me that it works.
But what does it gain? There's no gain.
Less traffic on the roads where people live.
But why is that beneficial?
Well, because people will be breathing in fewer fumes and running a lower risk of getting hit by a vehicle.
Yeah, but then what are you going to do next? Ban cars to stop people getting hit completely?
Well, you can. Yes, they have pedestrianised some areas, and in those areas there are generally no road traffic accidents at all, Danny. Correct. But you can't obviously ban all cars, because that would be very stupid.
But then that's part of war on motorists, is it not?
Not really, no. If you were, for example, to say that you're not allowed to fire a gun in a cinema, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to fire a gun at a shooting gallery, does it? So when they ban guns in some scenarios, or let's pick something else, shall we? Cigarettes. You're not allowed to smoke indoors, but you can still smoke outdoors. So have they banned cigarettes entirely?
Yeah, but that's A and B. You're allowed to drive in this road. They just want you to go all the way around. And if you go through this specific entrance...
No, they want you to get... now, you as a... I can't believe I have to explain this to you, mate. You're the driver, the delivery driver. But you're in a very specific situation, because most people are going from where the boxes are, where the beautiful flower pots are with their glorious floral displays. They're going from there to some distant point, and they have been discouraged from using that road as a cut-through, whereas you have to actually deliver to that road. So you are actually the true victim of these policies because you, as a delivery driver, are not using it as a cut through to get somewhere else, except, of course, Danny, when you are, but you can't. So that's all, you see. So for most drivers, it prevents them from treating a residential road like a thoroughfare.
I understand that, but I want to say one thing that I think is important.
Go on then, yeah.
I think with all the issues going on in our country right now, and even outside the country nationally, I find it offensive that, for example, tax money, all this is going into plant pots. Even that it's going into planning these plant pots with all the things going on.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how offensive do you find it?
I feel quite offended.
But how offended?
Quite offended.
What, very offended, or just
very offended that I had to call in? So
then there it is.
I think people who are on
is it the plant pot? Would you prefer that they'd used some other form of obstacle?
I'd rather. I don't see the need for an obstacle. I know
perhaps a nice fence or something would be okay.
No. I mean, I know a lot of drivers are some drivers aren't good. Some drivers are good, but for example, the speed limit, the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I know it reduces accidents, obviously, but then if you ban cars, it will also reduce accidents. But going from 30 to 20 I've seen 3-lane carriageways where pedestrians cannot even walk, and they've made it 20. And I'm thinking, why? If you crash on this road, you have to be bad.
Where's that?
You're affecting everyone.
Where is that? Where is the 3-lane highway with a 20-mile-per-hour limit and no pedestrians allowed?
Central London, there's multiple. It's gated.
What do you mean there's no pedestrians in Central London? Central London's full of pedestrians.
No. I don't mean there's no pedestrians. There's certain roads that it will be 3 lanes, and it will have it will have proper fences.
You mean literally Central London, like the most built-up part of the entire country?
Not exactly, around it.
Well, you said Central London. Oh, come on, Danny. Hang on. I've got. What about?
I'll give you another example.
No, please don't, example. Danny.
Southampton.
Please, Southampton.
Hampstead. Yeah.
Bollards.
Hampstead. I go there all
Bollards,
the time.
Mate.
It went from 30 to 20. There's huge bollards. There's traffic lights.
I like
so
bollards.
someone's going to stop for a traffic light for someone to cross. Yep. There's no reason for it to be 20. It's just slowing down. It's creating more traffic.
Of course there is. You can't. 20 isn't equivalent to stopping. Have a look at. Do me a favour. Do me a favour. Have a look at the research into the damage that is done if a human or a kid gets hit at 20 miles an hour compared to the damage that's done at 30. Have a look at.
That.
No, you don't. You clearly don't. You clearly don't. The statistics.
Listen, I'm speaking from my experience.
You can't keep doing this thing. You can't keep doing this thing where you say, I understand that reduces death. So why don't they ban cars completely, or why don't they introduce 20-mile-per-hour limits everywhere? Because you're kind of undoing your own point. In an ideal world, there would be no death. Cost-benefit analysis means that because we need cars, we also will have to live with road traffic accidents. But attempts to minimise, Danny, the amount of deaths can't really be countered by saying, well, why are they trying to minimise the amount of deaths when they could ban cars entirely? Do you see why that's just silly?
I understand the minimise, but you know when they made can I tell you a fact?
No, you can't.
When they made the
I said you can't. I've finished now. I've had enough. Seriously.
Okay.
You've completely sucked any potential joy out of this conversation single-handedly.
Well, I apologise.
No, don't apologise. It's entirely my fault. It's entirely my fault. I hope you ring me again on a more interesting subject one day.
All right, hopefully.
It's 20 past 12. It is 22 minutes after 12, and it is currently not challenging my previous conviction that motoring phone-ins are almost always a little bit dull. But there's room, and perhaps Farhan is the man to change things. The war on motorists, Farhan, what's going on? What is it? Where is it?
James, let me try and inject a little bit more fun into your discussion today, make it interesting. But first of all, a little fact. Why is air pollution especially harmful to babies and young children? It's because as they're developing, the asthma and the pollution of cars can actually make their lungs smaller and make them more prone to lung cancer when they're older. So this is a very serious issue, actually. And I have actually implemented those 20-mile-per-hour zones, and I've actually put in those planters and bollards.
How come? What's your day job? Or do you do it as a guerrilla? Do you do it as a rogue? Do you go around dropping enormous bollards everywhere just for fun?
No, I work for TfL local authorities implementing road traffic calming. It's all part of Vision 2040 to reduce KSIs, killed and seriously injured on roads.
There's nothing funny about this. So what do you do when you hear, and you heard Danny. Danny's a lovely bloke. There's nothing wrong with Danny, but he's supremely unpersuaded by the urgency of what you clearly see as a matter of life and death.
Well, Danny's a delivery driver, and I do some deliveries on the side as a side hustle. Okay. Now, I understand the reason that he's upset because he can't drive on the same roads that he's used to.
Yes.
But this war on the motorists, what people need to understand is that's codified. It's actually a war on the Tory voter. They see it as. Okay, so if you look at the Tory heartlands, they're all on the outskirts of London, where public transport and walking and cycling is slightly less provided for. So to those people, they need to drive into London or wherever or around the outskirts. But when they drive into London, they're bringing their pollution, their congestion, and all of their angry traffic through places where people live. And those places where people live typically will be Labour voters or more on the left. So really, you're kind of you're when you've got a war on the motorist, you're trying to deflect the people that are driving in from the outskirts and introducing all that pollution into the central of London and other big cities around the UK.
Yes, I hear you. So that's the politics of it then, presumably, is that it appeals to well, they think it appeals to Tory voters, although the reversal in Sadiq Khan's fortunes post the Uxbridge by-election looks as if it certainly speaks to the possibility that the Tories have bet the house on a bit of a bogus board here.
Well, the thing is, Sadiq Khan is very passionate about this for the right reasons. He's talking about children that will be affected by this. I mean, it's scientifically proven that the more pollution there is in the air, the more stunted the children's lungs are that grow up in that environment. So for me, it's a very kind of clear-cut case. We need to reinvest in public transport, make it easier for people to walk and cycle, and use alternative methods of getting around, except for the motor car. And you know what? Electric cars will help, I'm sure, but really we need to stop politicising this and make it about the children, I guess.
That's a really interesting thing. Because I'm only interested in it when it gets politicised, but that makes me a bit of a plonker, frankly, doesn't it? Because you should. It's not sexy, Farhan, with respect. I can't. A phone in on why these things we should have fewer cars on the roads. I can't. It's still a motoring phone in. But you're right. I hadn't really noticed that it. There's no real reason why it should be left-right, except for that thing you've just said about perhaps the families living in urban areas, living in built-up areas, are more likely to be less well-off and perhaps to historically or potentially vote Labour. And so the motorist...
And less likely to own a car.
And less likely to own a car. So the motorist who... And quite often people get into a car and their personality changes to curtail somebody's automotive freedom. Some men feel it almost as an assault upon their fragile masculinity. So that's where it becomes right-wing.
Can I take us back to Thatcher as well?
Of course.
Because, of course, when it was, the Thatcher years and the new Reagan-Thatcher economics were coming to Britain, Thatcher said that there's nothing more sad than a man that's waiting at the bus stop.
Yeah, she did.
Because he's not achieved anything in life or whatever. So it's very offensive, actually. And, when you think of a Thatcherite like Rishi Sunak saying there's a war on the motorists, actually, maybe he's trying to channel Thatcher.
A little bit of that. It's possible, isn't it? And just given what you know and given what you do and given what you watch, is it going to work, do you think?
Well, it's already working. 20-mile per hour zones.
No. I mean, is the politicization of it going to work? Is it because...
Unfortunately, with people that are, delivery drivers, they don't seem to realise. All they see is the first impact. They don't see the long-term goals.
Yeah, but there aren't enough delivery drivers to sway any elections. And in a way, Danny's got a point, because if he can't drive up that road where he's actually making a delivery without taking a 20-minute detour, he's got every right to be hacked off.
That's exaggerating. It's not going to be a 20-minute detour.
I'm on the radio. It's what I do. Of course I'm exaggerating. What do you expect, man? All right, a 12-and-a-half-minute detour, as opposed to the person who is simply not able able to not use my road anymore as a cut through.
Well, if you've ever walked down those roads that have been, not made rat runs anymore.
Rat runs was the word I was looking for.
They're beautiful to walk down.
Yes.
They're beautiful to walk down. They've got planters. People are, very, very gaily walking with their dogs, everywhere. It's beautiful. So why would people not want more of that?
Because it takes them twice as long to get to the supermarket and back every Friday.
Just the motorists.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, it's quicker for someone to actually walk down that way or cycle down that way. So actually, the cyclist benefits, the pedestrian, benefits, lots of people benefit. And I don't really like this whole idea that there is a motorist. Anyone can just get in a car if they've got a license. And actually it's not very inclusive, is it? Because not everyone can drive.
No, that's true as well. And most cyclists have got a car anyway, or many pedestrians have got a car as well. So
exactly.
It's a strange one, isn't it? So I continue the value. Do you know the mad thing about this, Farhan? Do you think, hand on heart, I could have expressed any less enthusiasm without going full King Charles? Do you think I could have expressed any less enthusiasm for this general topic than I have done in the introduction and the two calls I've taken?
Well, I don't know, because I'm quite passionate about this.
No, I know you are, but you've rung in, which I take as a compliment. Danny's rung in, which I take as a compliment. The switchboard is full.
But why are you not interested?
Because it just you're interesting. But you'd be like a guest, not a caller. You're not here for a row. You're here to state the bleeding obvious. Danny's upset about plant pots, and you're upset about children's lungs and unnecessary deaths. It's not a debate, is it?
It shouldn't be a debate. It shouldn't be.
That's one of the reasons.
It's cheaper to drive. I've got a car. I'll fully admit I have a car. It's cheaper for me to drive around certain places than it is to actually get a train there, and that's really, really sad.
Yeah, that's nuts. Trains are getting worse, I think, and not only are they so expensive, but also they're increasingly you can't guarantee that you'll get where you need to get.
If we want to invest in the railways, why don't we, tax the motorist? I'm going to. That's the thing. But this is the thing. It makes it more equitable then. If we can make it more equitable to get from A to B via public transport, as it is currently, it's cheaper to get around by car at the moment. If we can make it more equitable, actually we'll be in a better position.
And everyone's a winner. Everyone's a winner. We'll talk again, I suspect. Well, maybe not, actually, but I hope so, because you are very interesting and genuinely passionate. And there is the debate, really. With respect to Danny, it's either you've got a problem with plant pots or you've got a problem with children growing up with stunted lungs, if they grow up at all. And I know it's an extreme way of putting it, but it's also accurate. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It's 12:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Away from COVID, so there's 78 accompanying pages that come with the King's speech, and there's nothing substantive about the plan for drivers. So the idea that there are going to be crackdowns on low traffic neighbourhoods or 20 mile per hour speed limits, it possibly is nebulous. It could be that it doesn't need any legislation. Or, as Peter Walker of The Guardian, who watches these things quite closely, asks, are ministers perhaps losing their impetus over this? Because I think if you drive for a living, so if you're a delivery driver or you have several jobs per day, I think you are the collateral damage in this story. But perhaps the miscalculation for the Tories is that most people don't actually care about it, which is why you go from the everyone talking about it endlessly with regard to ULEZ up to and including the point where the votes came in for the Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election, because the words and the rhetoric is 100 times more frightening than the reality. And now people have absorbed and lived with the reality. The political impetus has almost disappeared. You could be right. Dan has picked me up for being a bit daft. He goes, it's obvious why the Tory government are pushing it. It's all about individualism and getting back to Tory values. A driver who thinks only about themselves should be able to drive as fast as they want and not have to worry about anybody else. Remember David Cameron promising 80 mile per hour speed limits, Major with his hotline for roadworks with no workers. I quite like that. Rishi's just covering his backside with this. It speaks to some of the backbenchers in places like Bath, Birmingham and Manchester, where ULEZ is coming in. They don't care about kids' lungs. 12:37 is the time. I only chose this topic because I thought Emily Maitlis was going to be joining us at 12:30 to talk about America, and therefore we could move on quite quickly. But it's backfired horribly because we can't get hold of her. And so now I've got to talk to Geordie in Brent. Geordie, what do you want to say?
What I want to say is that I don't think there is a war on motorists deep down. I think a lot of people have misconstrued a lot of the LTN stuff and the 20-mile-an-hour zone as a war on motorists, which is a load of nonsense. But I do think motorists do have genuine concerns, though, about the LTNs. I think, for example, I work in Lambeth a lot, and Brixton Road is one of the highest polluting roads in London at the moment. I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but you can look that up. And I think that is due to some of the LTN.
Why can't you look it up before you ring in and say it?
No, I did look it up, but
you just said you're not sure if that's 100% correct. You can look it up.
Well, I'm not here to come on and obviously propagate fake news. That's why I said my.
But you can't ring in and tell me to look something up.
Well, I understand that. I understand that. But anyway, regardless of that point,
regardless of that point,
my point here is some roads in London carry more pollution than legally allowed, which is an issue caused by LTNs.
Well, it's not. It's an issue caused by cars.
But if the LTNs didn't exist, I'm not saying the LTNs are bad, actually. I'm actually in favour for LTNs. What I'm saying is LTNs in certain areas is pushing traffic off those back streets onto the main road, which is causing more pollution for people that live on those main roads. That's my point.
That seems to be a valid concern, but you don't live on those main roads.
No, I don't live on those main. I live off the main road, actually. To be fair, so the LTN's saving my health at the moment. But what I'm saying is, those people that do live on the main roads, what about their concerns about pollution? What about them?
Yeah, and they won't even have cars.
Some of them might have cars, some of them might not have cars.
Well, they probably won't have cars. There's nowhere to park them if you live on a really busy main road. There's very rarely any driving parkings. This is so boring, Geordie, isn't it?
Nah, look, I think it's boring as well. I'd rather talk
Why do you ring in, man?
Well, I came to ring in just to state my point about LTNs, because I think as well there is a genuine concern.
Well, is there, though?
Not the world's biggest concern, but it's just something that does need to be.
How do you feel about the plant pots?
I'm not fussed about the plant pots.
You really?
It's annoying.
Right.
It's annoying.
Oh,
it's annoying
God.
that you have to drive into them. But to be honest with you, there's bigger problems on this planet, this country. Like
there's not many bigger plant pots.
Well, someone needs to put in.
Keith looked it up. Keith looked it up. You were right about Brixton Road. Keith actually did look it up.
Yeah, no, that's my main point.
I know. I'm moving on now.
But anyway.
All right.
Anyway.
Oh, what?
Money needs to be spent onto public transport.
Yeah, well, that's very true. That's very true. It's 20-1. Emily Maitlis is in Atlanta, Georgia, to read the room a little as we move into. It's pretty close to the home straight of the next American presidential election. They do seem to sort of come around before the dust has even settled on the last one. But this particular period is, of course, even more febrile than ever before. Is that right, Emily? Is that why you're there, to sort of get to get a feeling for how the land lies?
Yeah, it really is. Georgia represents, I think, the heart of the political battle right now between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, because it symbolises somewhere that could just change the whole election. It could just turn the whole thing upside down. This is a swing state. It's what they call here a purple state. And Joe Biden won it last time round. First time in, about 30 years. But it's also the place that Trump is facing this mother of all trials. He's facing 13 criminal counts on his attempts or alleged attempts, conspiracy to overturn that election result of 2020. And so we are here, as you say, reading the room, but also just as we arrived, these new polls emerged showing what a tricky position Joe Biden is now in, that he's actually, if the election were to be held today, I mean, it's a year, basically a year's time, we will know who America's next president is. And it shows how much he's struggling in some of these states that he won last time round, that Donald Trump is now ahead in, at least if you are to believe the polling.
Do we know why? I mean, I appreciate that there are concerns about Biden's fragility and his age. But, to an outsider who's not paying attention, the charge sheet against Donald Trump is so long. He continues to lie about losing the last election. Does everybody who is minded to vote for Donald Trump believe the big lie about winning the last one?
Do you know what? I mean, the UK perspective on this is so different to the US one. And that's kind of why we're on the ground, because the story that we've been telling ourselves, I guess, is what Joe Biden has done in kind of legislative terms and in political terms. He's brought down inflation. He's got this extraordinary new act together, which provides lots of green jobs and energy. And so we assume that everything's all singing and dancing, when we read about these stuff from the UK. As soon as you're here, you realize that questions of democracy are very much secondary to how much it costs to fill your car, right? The tank of your car. If gas is high, then people are not happy. People really depend on low prices on fuel, low prices at the supermarket, low price for their weekly shop. And at the moment, they are, maybe it's a gilded memory or maybe there is something in it, but they are remembering a time 4 years ago when they think things were better. And of course, it's a time before, Russia was at war and Ukraine was invaded and we had, Israel and Gaza. So they also put at Joe Biden's door this idea that he has suddenly got America embroiled in foreign wars again. Now, obviously, there are no American feet on the ground, in Ukraine, in Israel, but they see the money that's leaving under Biden, the fact that he's propping up, Ukraine, the fact that he's sending money over there to what they think of as a European war. Yes. And they kind of go, well, why is he doing that? Why are all those billions going over there of our money? So I think first and foremost, it is a question of economy. And second, I think, is, James, we've been talking about this for a decade? It is the brilliance of Trump's messaging, and if you stand back, you say, hang on a second, last time I looked, Donald Trump was, 3 years younger than Biden? Yeah, 3.5 years younger, right? But he's managed to open this huge gap in the polls where 70% of people say that Biden is too old to be president, and only 39% say Donald Trump is. And I think it's partly to do with demeanor, that Trump has always played the strong man. He loves authoritarians. He loves Erdogan in Turkey. He loves Orban in Hungary. Did I get that the right way around? Yeah. Because, he didn't. And he loves Putin. And, he kind of loves all the strong men. And so you look at Biden, and Biden is very softly spoken, had a childhood stammer. He's let his hair go white. He shuffles around. Cognitively, I think he's still it feels like he's still making pretty sharp decisions on Israel, on the Middle East and all the rest of it. But it's very easy to portray him as the kind of the grandpa in the room. And Trump comes in all bluster. You saw him, you've probably seen the pictures of him in the trial yesterday in New York. And he wants to kick the dirt around and flex his muscles and throw his toys out the pram. And, there's a lot of people in America still who kind of go, that's what we want. We want a strong man.
Our guy.
Yeah.
And it gets glossed over. His little aberrations get glossed over. I know he was asked at one point yesterday whether he was responsible for assembling some financial detail, and he said he was busy in the White House dealing with China and Russia, and the judge or the lawyer pointed out, well, you weren't actually president at the time.
Yeah. What were you doing in the White House?
You must have been trespassing.
Yeah, but it's really funny because if you go into the detail of what happened yesterday, and just to kind of set it up on a sort of broader scale, because I think most of these trials go over our head, right? There's so many of them. You're just like, oh God, which one is this?
Yes,
is this the one with the kids? Is this the one with the fraud? Is this the one with the hooker? Is this, all the rest of it? And this is basically about whether he overvalued all his real estate, all his property, all his assets. And so, for example, Mar-a-Lago, the place in Palm Beach, just north of Miami, and the judge had sort of said, years ago, this is valued at 20 million, and Trump had said it was worth 500 million, right? So he completely sort of inflates the thing. And when the judge goes, why did you do that? Trump yesterday went, well, actually I got it wrong, it's worth $1 billion. It's worth $1.5 billion.
But that would also be a crime, wouldn't it? Even if he'd misrepresented it in the other direction.
Well, who knows? I guess the question is, who's to say? Who's to say what a former president's golf club real estate is kind of worth unless he actually puts it on the market and you see what people pay. It's kind of a bit amorphous. But I think one thing that happened yesterday, which might have been slightly overlooked, is this weird concession by Donald Trump, because it's all to do with, who can you blame, right? The kids we saw last week, we saw Eric Trump and Don Jr. And by the way, years ago, I interviewed Eric Trump. I was with him on the Westchester golf course, right? And he really does know what goes on there. He knows down to the seeds of the grass that they are growing, what goes on. I'm not saying, whether he knows every single detail of the finance. He wasn't pouring cement, which I think were the words he used in court, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing is that it's about whether people have signed off stuff without knowing, or whether they've changed stuff, or whether the lawyers, the accountants just put stuff before them to sign off. And what Donald Trump said was, he said, I'd look at these financial statements, I'd look at them, he said, talk about financial statements, I'd see them and maybe have some suggestions. Now, just focus on those last 4 words, because have some suggestions suggests that there is room there to infer that maybe he did start, pushing the valuations around. Maybe he did tell the accountants what they should be doing. And I'm not sure he meant to say that bit out loud. I mean, most of it, I think, was completely contrived. It was bluster, it was theatrics, it was spectacle. He's rude about the Attorney General, he's rude to the judge, he has to be shut down. He likes to perform, right? We know that about him. And it is all contrived. He likes to be the showman. And he's, again, going back to this thing, he's in a position of strength. Did you see him? But I think on that one question of whether he should have taken ownership of the statements, that might actually, potentially land him in a bit of trouble.
Final question, Emily, and I've asked Sopal this as well, and it does occur to me every time I speak to both of you, despite or perhaps because of your deep knowledge and experience of these matters, do you, on a personal level, ever have, with him, with Trump, do you ever have moments where you wonder why you bother? Because you're essentially trying to chronicle the nailing of jelly to the wall. I mean, the idea that you can apply the normal rules of journalism to Donald Trump, whereby providing this information to these people will prompt this response. He subverts absolutely everything, doesn't he?
Look, I think we do understand Trump in the sense that we know the sort of supreme narcissistic tendency is just you keep going, and you'll do whatever it takes to win. And right now he needs to win because he thinks it keeps him out of jail. The more interesting question for me, quite frankly, is the people around him.
Yes, okay.
And I think we've been talking to a lot of, what I'd call sort of kind of party representatives, Congress people, congressmen, or people who represent the Republican Party in the county, and trying to get a sense of whether they are going along with it, because those are the kind of contortions that I find fascinating. We spoke to this congressman on a golf course here at the weekend who admitted to us that he hadn't certified Joe Biden, right? Yeah, so technically he's in breach, I think, of the US Constitution, right? And he's representing the state of Georgia in the House of Representatives.
Incredible.
I mean, it's a pretty big thing, that, right?
Yes, of course.
And yet you sort of watch the kind of linguistic kind of torture that they're going through to say, I mean, he's not unusual. There's plenty of people in the Republican Party who were absolutely frozen after January the 6th. And I think if there'd been a strong voice there, and they still are, right? They still are. And I think part of them are kind of just thinking, oh my God, please let it be somebody, please let it be somebody else. But we see what happens. Trump has a direct pathway to the voters through his rallies, through his campaigns, even through these trials.
And there's nothing anyone can do. Emily, I got to go. I could listen to you all day, and often do, in fact. But on this occasion, I can no longer. Not least because I've got Yvette Cooper waiting on the other side of this. 12:55. I'm going to blame it all on Emily Maitlis, Yvette Cooper, but we don't have long. Shadow Home Secretary and Labour MP for Normanton, Pontefract, Castleford and Nottingley. The King's Speech today, ordinarily a moment for a government to have its legislative programme laid out in glorious technicolor. Did anything take you by surprise?
Well, I think there was nothing much in this at all, James. It's good to be here. There's a time when the country, so much across the country, feels broken. We've had so much chaos and people really are desperately crying out for change. What we saw from the King's speech was really a thin and weak programme for government, which shows that actually Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are simply not capable of delivering the change that we need. So, much missing, no serious plan for growth, no serious plan for tackling waiting lists and the crisis in our NHS, no serious plan to get police back on the beat or tackle things like the epidemic of shoplifting, the sorts of town centre crimes that people really are concerned about. So I think this is really letting the country down.
You're in a privileged position of opposition so that you can take pot shots at everything and also bat away questions about what you would do differently. So let's focus briefly on things that we know you would do differently. On these oil and gas licences, you would not issue any new ones, but neither would you repeal any ones that are introduced between now and a putative Labour government taking power.
Yeah, that's right. I think the
Just
Energy
explain
Secretary...
that, will you? Because it's a bit weird, I think.
Well, I think it's partly about the difficulty of having certainty for investors of decisions that we're not in a position to be able to take at the moment. I wish we were in government right now, and then we would be able to take sensible decisions and prevent the government really taking these very short-termist decisions that also, as the Energy Secretary admitted this week, won't cut energy bills. And that's, the ridiculous thing. What we should be doing is having a proper plan that will not only tackle the serious challenge of climate change, but also make sure we can cut people's energy bills at a time when there's a cost of living crisis going on. I think that's what people want to see.
I mentioned we were short of time, so a couple of quick ones. Do you think that people who are sympathetic to the plight of Palestinian people in Gaza at the moment should march on Saturday?
Well, this is an operational matter for the police. Remembrance is really important. It's a time when people need to come together, and we've been clear that remembrance events need to be respected and protected. But the police have to make these operational decisions. They have made an assessment that, as I understand it, is not based on their assessment around the main marches. It's based on assessment around the risks from fringe groups and from breakaway groups as well. So that's the basis on which they've made a request about postponement. Look, it's their operational decisions, but we do support the police, and I think we should support the police rather than taking the Home Secretary's approach, which is to try and second guess them and to try and use language that just inflames the situation and makes it harder for the police to sort this.
Deliberately, you think? She's deliberately trying to inflame the situation by calling it a hate march?
Yeah, I think she is deliberately chasing headlines.
Right.
I mean, look, this King's speech has, her flagship policy was about banning tents, for heaven's sake. The only person who could think the answer to homelessness that has gone up by 70% is to ban tents. It looks as though that's not now even in the King's speech because of rows within the government. I mean, she's just off on one, isn't she? She's chasing headlines as part of her attempt to try and become the next Conservative leader, as opposed to the things that are in the interests of the country. It's serious. She's got a serious job. She should be pulling communities together rather than chasing headlines in her own interest.
Final question, and speaking of chasing headlines, do you owe an apology to Just Stop Oil for tweeting yesterday that they targeted the cenotaph when they hadn't?
No, I think, look, it's really important to be clear that nobody should be targeting the cenotaph.
Well, nobody did
to
yesterday.
Respect remembrance,
nobody
indeed.
did.
And that's why...
And you sort of said that they did.
Hang on. No. That's why I removed the tweet when it became clear that the police provided more information. But I think it's also right to be clear that we should show respect for the cenotaph as well. And, I have taken a different approach to the Home Secretary on this. I haven't just, continued to just look for the inflammatory language, which is about dividing communities, and to also respect the things that the police tell us, the information that they give us, and to try and actually, what do we do to pull this country together to make us safer, to keep our communities safer?
I know I said final question, but I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking about the timelines actually, because I was with Saeed Avasi last night, and you speak almost as one on the subject of Suella Braverman, and yet not long ago you were a Labour frontbencher and she was speaking for the Tories in the House of Lords. Does that surprise you?
Well, look, I do think that there are many sensible people who've either previously been part of the Conservative Party or who have voted Conservatives in the past who are appalled at the way that the Conservative Party is going right now, particularly appalled at the way Suella Braverman has been behaving and the sort of chasing headlines, the inflammatory language, but also at just their chaos and their failure to tackle the serious problems that we face. So, look, of course, there are areas Saeed Avasi and I will have big policy differences and things that I want to change around the country, but I do also think that there's a lot of people actually thinking, they have a lot more in common now with the Labour Party and with the things that Keir Starmer wants to do to change the country than the total chaos we're seeing from the government.
Thank you very much indeed, Yvette Cooper.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Shadow Home Secretary. Apologies to Sheila Fogarty. You can, of course, rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at 4. Sheila with you now. Brick with you at